Listen, I'm going to tell you, you never cease to amaze me. I love working back here. I just love it.
It's like a
So
little
thoughtful.
wonderful.
Good to see you. How you doing? Like the hairstyle?
It was great. Good. How are you today?
You want this or you want the chocolate?
Great.
I haven't had lunch over, so today I'm having caffeine. This? That's it.
Dan.
Whoever.
I know. Whoever. His last name, they get K-U-N. K-U-N-I-T-Z-E-R.
You don't have a number.
Oh, how cute.
They both go to school of the arts.
Oh, wait, yeah. This goes
Yep.
559-9194.
That's really
It might be
nice.
5215.
Her.
Enjoy camp.
Well, I think that school is so great. Yeah. Really, zero events for kids that are like
Our kids know want to do the art, the that kind of stuff. Enjoy it. My daughter was taught when she was 14.
You got his name and his phone number. Wait.
I was only trying to see whether it was a bad person. That's your explanation. That's your explanation.
lots on the agenda.
I was only trying to see if it was a bad person. So we all got very creative.
They didn't do that for a reason. Yeah, but you have to look at it.
Wilson? Is it? You know what, Rusty?
Taking everything.
Get on Brian here, get the clock straight. I can see, is Mark and, yeah, Mark over there, right behind Charlie.
They're just here.
Right behind Charlie.
I just,
Oh, okay. You know, I've never had to look past this man. Yeah. This is the biggest crowd we've had in there. All right, I'm going to call the town council meeting to order. If everybody could join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Where's? I was looking for Pedro. Who's moving our?
Pedro's over there.
Okay, you got it? Okay. Boy, what fantastic turnout. I don't know what I have to thank for having this many people, but it's nice to see a good audience. I'm going to start off with the approval of minutes, the minutes of the town council meeting of June 4th, 2019. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any comments, changes?
No.
Nothing? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay, minutes are approved. You want to switch over to the minutes, to the agenda? Since I don't bring papers to the meeting now, I need that to see it. Thanks. Mayor's update. I've just got a couple things quickly I want to point out, and then we have a really full agenda today, so we're going to try to move through this quickly, but at the same time make sure we have enough time for a lot of discussion. A couple comments though I want to make. Two different things that involve thanking a number of people. Last week we had, I think most of you saw that we had a missing person, a missing child on the island. And it was really, I want to give some thanks to all of the different agencies that responded so quickly to that event. If people are ever interested in whether this island has a lot of security support, is a safe island, I think that event last week is a good example. We had a child that was reported missing on the beach in the water. A 911 call came in, and we had, among the different agencies, the command was set up and managed by the St. John's Fire District, but we had support with the Beach Patrol, the Coast Guard, the Sheriff's Office, both the County Sheriff and our town deputies, Resort Security, Charleston County Rescue, and the Community Association. So, and I think within a couple hours, I think everybody knows the child was found unharmed at the sanctuary. So that was good to know. But just the fantastic response we had from that many entities. I have to thank all of those groups and all of those individuals. The other thing I want to stress too from that is that the initial call that came in was a 911 call. And I don't know how many times I know in town articles we've tried to stress that with all of the different entities in the county and in the town and so on, people often get confused on what's the best way to handle an emergency. And the answer is always dial 911. That is the response that is going to get you the fastest response. It is going to get all of the correct entities involved. I know that often people are reluctant to dial 911. They're concerned about, well, am I escalating this to too big of an issue? You know, am I going to get in trouble for doing that? And I can't stress enough that 911 is the correct response. And in this case, it I think really made a difference in getting all of these entities out. So I was really happy to see that. The other thing that I also wanted to point out, I think many of you know that for the last several years, we've had significant issues. Do I have anybody from Inlet Cove here? Good, then they won't tell me I'm wrong. We've had big issues for a few years with all of the traffic on beach walkers as a result of the county park. Cars backing up, causing not only traffic problems, but issues for our residents in Sparrow Pond and for Inlet Cove. And so over the last 2 years, we've worked hard with the Park District to find a solution to that problem, which resulted, if you've seen it in the addition in the last year, of a dedicated turn lane into the park, as well as the agreement with the Park District to try a new application that allowed them to actually turn people around, give them a little phone-based app that would allow them to get on a waiting list, go somewhere, and then come back. And prior to that, we've had continual complaints, all sorts of problems. That road was finished this spring, and I'm happy to say that we've been through our major holidays, our major weeks. We've had absolutely no complaints from our residents in Sparrow Pond or Inlet Cove. We've had the traffic. We've not had to call in individual police officers to man that road. And so I do want to thank the town staff. I want to thank the Public Works Committee that was involved. I want to thank Councilman Wydock, who's been dealing with that issue over a couple of years. And I want to thank the Charleston County Park District for being so cooperative. So we've, I think, really fixed a problem there. And the only last thing I've got, and this is intended to be lighthearted, but just before I came in, I saw on the internet an app, the 17 best things to do in Charleston. And among the 17 things were to visit the Kiawah Island and visit the Kiawah Island golf course. But they did say, and Jimmy here? Good. No, I meant Jimmy Bailey. Okay. Yeah, all right.
It's all right, Jim.
But it did say, in just to help people on MSN know, it says, but you can't just show up. You need a plan. It says, as long as you tell them exactly where you're going, they will wave you right through. All right. I see Dave sitting there, so I'll let you deal with that one. How's that? All right. With that, I'm going to open it up to citizens' comments. Do we have anyone who has any comments they'd like to make related to something which is on today's agenda? Wendy.
Wendy Kulik, 38 Marsh Edge Lane. Following along, Craig, of your thanks lists, I just want to thank all the people who have contributed to the school supply drive for Mount Zion Elementary School, a number of whom are sitting in the room here. We've been able to buy tons and tons of supplies, and one of the guest bedrooms in our house, my husband has dubbed the school supply closet because there's so much stuff in there. But thanks to everybody. I know that both the teachers and the students are extremely appreciative of the generosity of people on Kiowa and Seabrook. Thank you.
Okay. Andy?
Andy Capelli, 160 Governor's Drive. I just want to express my appreciation to the partners for finally getting a sort of master plan, I'd call it, for parcel 13, at least a good portion of parcel 13. It's been a long time coming. We're waiting for it, but one might be considered an oversight, but take a look at the math that leads up to your motion today. The entire the entire parcel 13 in the development agreement was zoned or approved for 284 units, 234, I'm sorry, 234. With the remaining section A, 13A and 13B, you're reapproving essentially 234 units. What is missing is 13A, which was part of the original, 13C, which was part of the original 13. Okay. And there's already 21 units in there. So just might have been an oversight, but if we're going to approve a motion today, I think you need to correct the math.
Let me go ahead and clarify, since you're up here, clarify that one. Andy, all we're doing, and this will be more clear later, is we're breaking 13A out. The remainder, 13, still consists of 13B and 13C. So that remaining includes the 21 Timbers units. We're not adding any additional. So does that make sense? We'll explain it then when we get to the item.
Yeah, I think then if that's the case, which is fine, since you're breaking out on the exhibit 13.2, 13A, you should also have 13C broken out and separately disclosed.
Okay, and we'll explain it again later. Okay, thank you. Any other citizens' comments? Okay. With that, I know we have an unusually full agenda today, and partly because we have a couple presentations that we would like to include. The first item is a presentation by the Charleston County Transportation Development Report on the Main Road Corridor Alternatives. In just a couple minutes or a couple seconds of background on this, and let me first also introduce our presenters, Devry DeToma, who is the Charleston County Transportation Department, and Mitchell Metz, you're Vice President of Project Business Management, Infrastructure Consulting, and Engineering, correct? Got it. And a little bit of background here. The town, along with the Community Association and other entities in the island, have been, for as many years as I've been here, aggressively working with the county and others, focused on trying to ensure and improve the roads and transportation to and from the island, across Johns Island, sometimes with limited success, but a significant amount of effort has gone into that over a number of years. In the last year, there have been developments which I think you all are aware of, the half-cent sales tax, and out of that have been a number of different projects, one of which is a set of projects that involve For us, the Savannah Highway Main Road intersection, essentially Main Road from Bees Ferry down to River Road, a second project on Main from River down to Maybank, and then a third project from Maybank down to River. And what I have asked the presenters to do is come in today for about 20 or 30 minutes and give us an update on those projects, give us some background in terms of both the underlying, all three projects, where they stand, what the process is. And then I think many of you have seen that more recently there has been a lot of work done on the first project, looking at a number of different alternatives on the flyover. This is really background, I think, to help both the town council have a better appreciation, understanding of what the issues are. I'm glad we've got this many people here today, and hopefully you'll find this interesting also. I do want to highlight the fact that, if you may recall, last year I did a quick little survey of residents and asked them what they thought were some of the most important issues affecting Kiowa Island. And of the 20 or 30 items that they had to choose from, assuring safe roads and safe transportation across Johns Island was the number 3 item out of the 30-some items. So this is something that's long been of interest and concern to us. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Mitchell's going to do the presentation, but I am the county project manager. I would encourage y'all also to go to our website, mainroadcorridor.com. We'll always have updated info on there. And I'll let y'all know, y'all are the second group of people that have seen the results of Segment A. And Segment A is the 17 main road intersection improvements. And we'll go over the Bohicket part and the NEPA process and what's involved. And one more thing I'll say, it is very important that everyone comes to these public meetings and provides comments, because everybody's comments counts equally. So your comment counts as equal as if the town was to give us comments. So just keep that in mind as we move forward through these segments.
Well, thank you, Devery. Mr. Mayor, members of council, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. As many of you know, Main Road is funded through the 2016 Charleston County Sales Tax Program. And the company I work for, Infrastructure Consulting and Engineering, was hired by Charleston County to advance the improvements along the Main Road corridor. So when we sat down and started looking at the project, what was in the referendum was the section of Main Road from Bees Ferry to Betsy Carrison Parkway. It's about a 15-mile piece of roadway. As you go along that stretch of roadway, the traffic changes, the site conditions change, and quite honestly, the issues that we have to deal with in developing highway projects are different. So we looked at, do we develop it as one singular project, or do we kind of look at it and maybe break it up into separate projects? And we determined, through working with the county and with the Army Corps of Engineers, who will be the lead federal agency on the project, that breaking it into segments, we could expedite some of the more needed improvements and still advance the project in a meaningful way. So what we've done here, and I know the map's hard to see, this presentation isn't on our website right now, but something very similar to this will be probably within 2 weeks. So you'll see these very same graphics and probably some additional graphics that we're showing today. But segment A goes from Bees Ferry, which is right here, down to River Chisholm Road, and includes the US 17 main interchange. The estimate of that is $80 to $95 million. Segment B picks up at that point and proceeds down to just north of the Maybank Highway intersection. And then segment C is largely the Bohicket section of the roadway, the 7 miles or so from just north of Maybank down to Betsy Carrison Parkway. Segment A, we've been underway for about a year, and that's the section that's got the most publicity right now. We've developed some alternatives. I'll show you some of that in a second. Segment B, we're standing idle on right now, and that's for several reasons. First and foremost, based on the outcome with the 526 extension, the forecast traffic shows that section may not need widening if 526 is ultimately constructed. Now, if you know what's going to happen with 526, y'all let me know and let Devery know. We'd all like to know about that. It might make our jobs a little bit easier here. So we're looking at traffic with and without 526 in the model, and that does have a pretty significant impact on the distribution of traffic, obviously, coming on and off the island. Segment C, we've just gotten started on, and I'll talk about that more toward the end. But in addition to that, we're looking to implement some intersection improvements at Main Road and Maybank Highway in the short term. Some short-term sort of stopgap improvements, and I'll talk about those a little bit later on in the presentation. Well, how do we go about figuring out what the alternatives are going to be? When there's federal oversight on a project, NEPA is an acronym that stands for the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969. This was passed and implemented during the Nixon administration. And quite simply, it says if you're going to spend federal money, which comes to South Carolina by your federal gas tax, or you need a federal permit, you've got to follow NEPA. All right? Well, this project's 100% funded by Charleston County sales tax, so we don't have the federal funding. So that takes FHW, the Federal Highway Administration, out of the picture. But we do need a permit for jurisdictional wetland impacts, and that is overseen by the United States Army Corps of Engineers. So they have jurisdiction on this project, and since they do, NEPA has to be followed and apply. What are the key components of NEPA? Well, NEPA simply says you must study a range of alternatives and document your impacts. All right? You must evaluate all those alternatives to the equal level of detail. You've got to do it in a very transparent process with the agencies. We've got a lot of agencies to coordinate with. Alphabet soup of agencies there is the Corps of Engineers, DHEC, Fish and Wildlife Service, South Carolina Department of Transportation, Archives and History, and there are many other agencies that have jurisdiction and say-so over what we do with the highway project. Obviously, the other component that's strong in NEPA is public involvement. You've got to demonstrate to the Corps that the public's had input and how you address that input with the development of all your alternatives. Segment A, we're underway, been underway for about a year. We started by developing, and I'm sorry, you probably can't read that, a project purpose and need statement. Well, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? On segment A, we're trying to reduce the congestion, improve capacity at the US 17 and Main Road intersection. We're also trying to increase capacity, improve safety along Main Road from Bees Ferry to River Chisholm Road. There are also some secondary things that we want to accomplish that are important on the project as well. Provide bicycle and pedestrian opportunities. On segment A, at a minimum, we're going to extend the West Ashley Greenway from its current terminus near the railroad bridge back up along Main Road to Bees Ferry Road, to the multi-use path up along Bees Ferry Road. We're also looking to certainly address the drainage issue that has led to the road being closed multiple times over the last 5 years. So those are some other things that we want to do. So we'll develop a purpose and need. We start looking at alternatives, and then we go to these alternatives meet the stated purpose and need of the project. If they do, we carry them forward, we study them more. If they don't, we kick them out and document why. Because the Corps comes back when we turn in our information in a permit application and says, this is the one we want to build. Well, they go over and make an independent review of everything and tell you, where they agree and where they disagree and all the changes that you have to make. On segment A, we had a public meeting back on May 20th at St. John's High School. We had 443 people attend. We received that night 95 written comments. Over the course of the next month, we received 169 email comments through our website, and we received 2 letters. There's a breakdown of the comments indicating preference by alternative number. And I'm going to walk through a slide on each alternative just to give you an idea of what they are. Separate from the presentation, our alternatives are on the website, and you can view those now. They've been on there since May 20th. This is just a summary slide. I'll cover that again at the end. Alternative 1 is a single point urban diamond interchange. It's a very common, probably the most common interchange type in the country. We had 23 people who attended voice support for alternative 1. single point Urban Diamond, and that gives you a basis of some of the other impacts, some of the wetlands, the potential relocations, and some of the other items that we're quantifying and helping us drive a decision toward a preferred alternative. Alternative 2 is a single point Urban Diamond interchange. It's a little bit different configuration, similar to Alternative 1, but probably has a little more capacity, ability to handle capacity than the first one. 27 people voiced support for that particular alternative. Alternative 3 is a partial cloverleaf. We had, again, 27 people, or roughly 13%, voice support for that alternative. Alternative 4 is similar to Alternative 3. It's a partial cloverleaf, but it only has one loop, introducing a left-hand turn from the exit ramp onto Main Road going back toward Bees Ferry. That was the least popular. And it's interesting to note, going into the meeting, if I would have told you which one I thought might get the most support, it was probably Alternative 4, just in my mind. So it shows you what I know. It got the least support. But the one thing that resonated with me is the people who came were, what's going to handle the most traffic? What's going to handle traffic and clear this problem up the best? That's mostly the universal thing we heard all night when it came to these alternatives. Well, 4 only got 7 people who voiced support of it. Now, this alternative is a little bit different. I've turned the slide on you, and I'll give you a little orientation here. This is Highway 17. Charleston is back this way. Hollywood's this way. This is the Stono Bridge, and this is Main Road. Here's the Publix, and here's Bees Ferry. So this alternative is you come over the Stono River Bridge, you would go off on new location through the tidal area and interchange with a new intersection over here at 17, and that is Blue Water Way right there. All right, this red you see right here is a bridge that would take Main Road over 17. So now anybody coming on or off the island would do so under free flow movements in all these directions at that location. All right, that alternative was the most preferred from the people who provided comments at the meeting. We had 68 people voice support for that particular alternative. Alternative 6 is similar to Alternative 5, but it only handles the on-island movement and the return off-island movement. And you're still coming up to the intersection to make the other movements. We've gotten some negative comments back from DOT regarding this particular intersection, but it was the second most popular choice at the meeting. And last but not least is a diverging diamond interchange. This is a fairly new interchange type. I would encourage you, if you're interested, to Google it. There's some good videos that kind of show you how it works. To explain how it works is not the easiest thing to do, but it is a new high-capacity interchange gaining popularity across the country. I think there are at least 2 under design here in South Carolina as we speak. But I think a little bit of the fear of unknown on that one kept its comments down, but we only got 15 in support of that particular alternative. Now, in addition to the intersection at 17 in Main, we showed 3 different alternatives for the River Chisholm intersection. So this is the intersection of the current intersection of River Road, Main Road, and Chisholm. So this is Chisholm here, Main here, and River over here. And these are 3 different alternatives for the same intersection. So the first intersection, A, separates the 2 legs of the intersection and brings the River leg to the north and the Chisholm leg to the south. B introduces a roundabout at that location and still brings Chisholm off to the south. And C relocates the intersection and relocates Chisholm up into a better geometrical configuration with River Road. All of these have their issues. And I can't say, if you base it on the comments we received that night, 32 people voiced support for the roundabout. But if you see the footnote here, we also got 26 people that didn't really say they liked any alternative, but they just didn't like roundabouts. So we don't care what you do, just don't build a roundabout. So, we got to take all of that into consideration. There's a lot going on right here. We've got the foot of the Stono River Bridge right up in this area. We got the tidal marsh over here. We've got the Limehouse Home Place right here, and we've got the Butcher Oak smack dab in the middle of the intersection now. All the things which we need to try to avoid or miss. So we're working on that. It's a heavy movement. The thing we've learned most, I think, so far is the movement coming from River Road onto Main Road going off Island is about equal to the traffic coming up Main Road through the intersection going off Island. So more to come on this one. Also, the 526 issue could play a major role here as to what we do and how we develop the alternatives at this intersection. So more to come on this, but we're honing in hopefully on a good solution there. I'm sorry, the looks like the font or something kind of got messed up there, but what we did is put a quick pie chart together and identified the major comments that we received at the meeting. We categorized or captured anything we heard at least 10 or more times. And for some reason,
The top three were environmental impacts,
right,
relocation, and can't remember what the third was.
it was environmental impacts, yeah, business impacts. I've got a hard copy right there, yeah, or you may have brought one. Environmental, business,
Relocation.
relocation, is that,
I don't
yeah, that was one of them. I don't know that it was the third,
Accelerate construction.
oh, yeah, I shouldn't, yeah. Everybody want it built today.
Right.
Why aren't you out there with the orange cones building the road right now, which is understandable. The yellow piece of pie at the bottom is the 26 anti-roundabout comments that we received. The comment next to that was development concerns. They wanted, a lot of comments about halting development until the roads were improved to catch up with it. The green piece of pie was about signals. They looked at signals as being sort of bad when they looked at the interchange alternatives. They wanted signalization kept to a minimum. The dark blue was the flooding concerns. They wanted the flooding addressed. The next was evacuation routes. At about 11 o'clock up there would be bike ped. And the last one was the Bolton's Landings folks turned out and had concerns about not being able to make a left turn out of their neighborhood on the Highway 17 up there. So there was a push to see that incorporated. This is the bar chart we were looking at earlier, just graphically depicting, and you can see where alternative 5 comes in. You put alternative 5 and 6 together, that's over 50% of those who responded voiced support for one of those two alternatives. And then alternative B for River Chisholm was over, looks like 33% for that. So, but we also noted that the 26 negative comments against roundabouts in general. Well, all that sounds good. What do we do with it and kind of where do we go from here? Because people want the project under construction ASAP, they want relief. We're driving this toward a decision of a preferred alternative. And NEPA's, this is where we've got to be careful. We've got to follow NEPA and make sure we do things in a systematic way or we have to go back and redo. So we want to be very careful with this. We'll be looking at a number of factors. With these additional 7 alternatives, we'll be looking at the public input we just received. We're doing cost estimates as we speak. We're looking at the future projected traffic to see how it's going to function out. 2043 is the target year there. We're looking at the jurisdictional wetland impacts and the stream impacts because what do you think the Corps is going to look at? The jurisdictional wetland and the stream impacts. So that'll be very high on their list, if not the highest on their list. There's some other factors there, hazmat, threatened and endangered species, the right-of-way impacts, and relocations are all things that we're going to put into a matrix and quantify for each alternative. And hopefully, if we're lucky, and we won't be, there'll be one alternative that's the best in every category. Odds are it's not going to work out that way. So then we'll have to look at it and make a decision. At that point, when we have a decision that the county supports on a preferred alternative, we'll come back out to the public. We'll say, here's what we've studied. Here's the decision we arrived at. What do you think? And at that point, they'll tell us how smart we are, and we'll be on down the road to hopefully building the project. But odds are, after that meeting, we'll go back and have to adjust the alternatives and make some adjustments in order to move forward. That's not uncommon. The graphic over here I know is impossible to see, but it's a little timeline illustrated by a road and sort of the project development process. We're about right here. And then we're going to be looking at doing the alternatives analysis, the identification of a preferred alternative we think will happen early next year. We'll have a public meeting. Then we'll prepare the permit application and the design for submittal of a permit application to the court. It quantifies the impacts of that preferred alternative. We'll then do the final right-of-way plan design, begin right-of-way acquisition, hopefully in early 2021, and go to construction in late 2022. We probably have about 100 pieces of property we'd have to buy in order to implement any of these improvements that we're talking about here. So that's another key component that we have to do with federal oversight. That's all about segment A predominantly. There's again some other things going on with the intersection improvements at Main and Maybank, and then the Bohicket sort of segment C corridor of Main Road. This is a pretty rough schematic of the intersection at Main and Maybank. So to get your bearing, that's going off island, that's going toward River Road this way, toward Wadmalaw, and then this is Bohicket headed south. So some of the improvements that we're looking at in the interim is to add an additional turn lane on Main Road, an additional left turn lane, on Main Road on the Maybank Highway. There's one there now, so we'd add one. There'd be a double left-hand turn lane in this direction. And we're looking at the same for Maybank Highway, adding an additional left turn lane for a two-way left turn lane coming south onto the Bohicket section there. Just really in the concept stages of that, but the thought is, as we talk about C a little bit, that we could get something implemented to give some short-term relief and then see what the answer is on C for how we're going to accomplish that project. And there may be further work at this intersection, and it may not, depending on what happens on segment C. So segment C, again, I'm sure this is difficult to see, but what you're looking at is sort of an outline of a study area. This is Maybank Highway. This is River Road around to Betsy Carrison Parkway, and then this is Bohicket back to River at the intersection of Maybank. So we're going to be looking at a range of alternatives, again, to be compliant with that NEPA process to satisfy the core requirements. We'll be looking at a range of alternatives here. We'll be looking at a widening of Bohicket Road. Now, it won't look like a conventional widening because one thing we know is those large, beautiful grand oaks, are off limits. So we're not going to be able to come in and just widen about the existing pavement like is often done on a highway improvement project. It may look something like Betsy Carrison Parkway that was done back, I believe, in the late 80s or early 90s, where you have a median section. So we may put two lanes on one side or the other of the existing road, and those will be a couple of alternatives that we will look at. In addition to that, we're going to look at some relocation alternatives within this area that were identified in the previous Sea Island Greenway study. All right, so I believe there were 4 that shook out of that study. We're going to pick that up and carry that forward, look at it, see if they're still accurate or revise those as needed. And then we also will probably be looking at a widening of River Road as a reasonable alternative as well. So out of all of that, we'll look at that and go through the same process that I just talked about on segment A. We'll get some, we'll develop a purpose and need statement. We'll develop some alternatives. We'll assess them against the purpose and need. Anything that doesn't meet that stated purpose and need will get thrown out. And then at that point, when we have some reasonable alternatives, we'll probably come out to the public at that time and show those to the public and get some input and going that way. We anticipate, just being honest with you, that this is going to be a little more controversial than segment A. It's just more issues to deal with here. And part of the reason we decided to segment the project is to allow those other improvements that we think are more straightforward than this section to go forward. If we had it all linked as one project, then we'd only move forward as fast as our slowest issue would allow us to go. So we're hopeful we can get A implemented more quickly. And hopefully through segment C, we'll build consensus and it won't be controversial. That's our goal. But, you know, we just think to get to a preferred alternative on this piece, we're thinking that's going to take us about 2 years. So from there, it'll depend on a lot of variables. If there's a tremendous amount of controversy, that can be elevated to a different environmental document stage, which is called an environmental impact statement. If it goes to an EIS, then your time is really, it just takes a lot longer. It could take 5 to 7 years, if not longer, depending on controversy. Again, our goal is for it to go smooth, to be very transparent, very open, and move this thing through as quickly as we can. Everybody who commented there's a lot of frustration about the traffic out here. I think everybody, I know the county, I know we do as the consultants, understand that. We hear it, we believe it, we deal with it. So we want to move it through as quick as anybody. So that's our goal. You know, with that, the website is the best way to keep project information. There it is, mainroadcorridor.com. All the alternatives that you just saw are on there. The data as far as the public meeting is not. I think Debbie just took it to a meeting one day last week, and we've got another meeting tomorrow, and after that we'll probably get some type of presentation similar to what you just saw up there for everybody to see the results of the public meeting. So we again appreciate the opportunity to be here. And Debbie, did I miss anything you wanted to make a point?
I think the important thing was segment C taking about 2 years, and probably a year before we have our first public meeting on that one too.
Yeah, it'll take us a while to get those alternatives in.
Matt, let me ask a couple questions, and I'll open in case any of the other council members would like to ask anything. On C, at one time, I'd had a conversation that while C was being evaluated, there was some thought to do here and there some minor modifications along Bohicket, a few turn lanes here and there. Is that still intended? Is that under this project, or would that be under the county separately from this doing that? They were very location specific.
I know they're looking at things for the PGA, and that would be my big boss, Jim Armstrong. He's working on stuff in his office for that. You're actually managing that as well. We're not looking at additional lanes in Bohicket. We have, you know, as you can see from the budget, it's really, really tight to even get this project done. But my big boss, Jim Armstrong, is looking at stuff to do for the PGA to help with traffic for that until we can figure this out and how much this is actually going to cost us.
And I think certainly in the conversations I had with people, the issue is always the timeline. You know, the comment is, will this ever happen in our lifetimes? I saw the 20 for phase 1, or 22 for phase 1. How realistic is that a conservative estimate? Do you think that is a realistic estimate?
I think it is a realistic and aggressive estimate for segment A. It is an aggressive, but believe it or not, it is aggressive. Very aggressive.
And then
And I think people tend to equate working on a project with the construction phase. When the orange cones show up and the equipment, then we're actually working on the project. There's a lot that has to go on, I hopefully gave you just a taste of what has to go on leading up to that point. But that's, the good news is there's funding in place. Most of our infrastructure needs in the region and in the state are this much, and we've got about that much funding to address it. This is funded. So the largest hurdle is jumped. Now we got to get through all the devil's always in the details, to get through all of that and deliver the project as quickly as we can. And trust me, there's every stone unturned to see how it can be expedited. The county has stepped up and funded a liaison position at the Corps of Engineers and paying their salary to work only on Charleston County projects to hopefully expedite things just like this.
Yeah. And the last comment I have or question is, as you well know, Seabrook, Kiowa, the Community Association have for a long time been on record that, that their preference was for the Greenway, you know, the new road Greenway concept across Johns Island, on the idea that both from an environmental, a cultural, and a safety impact, that it was preferred to widening Bohicket, which has a lot of issues. And it's been explained to me that what the Phase C process would allow to have happen is, as a result of the requirement to look at alternatives, the Greenway would in fact then be looked at as a potential alternative and get weighed in terms of, is that a correct understanding?
Yes, sir, that is. The new location alternatives that we're gonna start with, we're gonna pull from the Greenway study.
Okay.
So I think there were 4 that came out toward the end. I don't know that they ever identified, I think that goes back probably 10 years or more, that they ever identified a preferred route. That's before my time, but we have those studies. We'll be digging into that, but we're looking at several alternatives from that study and hopefully using that to springboard into our analysis here.
Okay. Council members?
On segment A, what type of time is required to complete the construction project from the moment you start putting orange cones down?
We're estimating about a 3-year construction time frame to build it. And it could change a little bit
Yeah.
depending on which alternative
Yeah,
is
5
selected.
and 6 are new locations, so you're not having to deal with existing traffic, so that one potentially could very well be done quicker, so.
Okay, thank you.
Any other council questions? And since I have a large crowd and we have a really big agenda day, so I just can't open it up to lots and lots of questions. But if there are 1 or 2 people in the audience that just have a clarifying question or something you'd like to ask, I'm willing to take the 3 or 4 minutes to do that. But I can only do a couple. Yeah.
I know you're working hard and I know you go through all that alphabet list, but it seems like if we wait for a resolution on 526, we're gonna have a bottleneck somewhere along this road, and we still won't be able to get off any island. So I'm frustrated, disappointed, and I kind of feel like not in my lifetime. And I know it's probably not your fault, but I just wish you'd go forward and not wait for 526. Hasn't that been in process for something like 12 to 15 years or longer? I mean, my God, our grandchildren will be dead by then.
And I'll let them
Well,
respond.
we are moving forward.
Yes,
What-
we're not waiting on Mark Clark extension.
We're not waiting, we are moving forward with A and C, but it does impact what we need to do in between those two
But if we
segments.
don't get B, then that's a bottleneck. You know, you have a 4-lane road, you put it down to
And then I think as we go forward, if that plays out that way, then B would be undertaken. You know,
despite 5, no resolution on
Well, they're working toward trying to get a resolution on it. It may not seem that way, I understand that, but they are working to try to get that resolved. Charleston County and the State Infrastructure Bank and DOT are all been working together to try to move that one way or the other.
All right, well, I'll take one more, and then we gotta move on, but thanks. Could you also give for the record, I also need your name and address for our minutes.
Charlie Bianco, 155 Augusta National.
Thanks.
It's a very specific, very narrow question, but for those of us that have lived through it, it is a go, no-go question. That is that area that floods between the intersection and the bridge. Can that be fixed soon? Or is that part of the overall 2023 maybe? Because that's a go, no-go.
Right.
And between now and 2025, it's probably gonna flood again, at least once.
Right. Okay, so our Public Works Department, Charleston County Public Works Department, actually has a FEMA grant to replace the culverts underneath the railroad bridge, which is a huge part of the problem, probably 90% of it. So they've already did a drainage study and they got money, and I'm going to put their schedule on our website. I need to talk to the project manager. They're gonna give us an elevation to build our road to make sure it doesn't flood, but they already have approval from FEMA to replace the culvert underneath the railroad.
All right, thanks. I really appreciate your coming in and providing this overview.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, again, I said we had a long agenda. Thank you all. We now have another presentation, Jim Jordan. And again, for the council members and for those of you here today, so
We're going to clear out.
I'll wait till everybody is moved around here a minute. Yeah, I lost my audience.
I haven't even started talking yet. They're already
feeling
leaving.
really
I thought
good.
they were coming for you.
Me too.
I was feeling good. All right, thanks. Jim Jordan has, I've asked Jim to talk to the council, and there's two purposes for this discussion. One is, as I think everybody knows, for a number of years, the town has been funding for Jim and for Aaron a significant amount of long-standing research into our major wildlife populations, such as bobcats, deer, alligators. And it's been a while, and I think it would be timely and I've asked Jim if he would share some of the findings and what we're seeing and some of the trends in the research that he has been conducting for years, but also most recently about these major wildlife populations. And for two reasons. One, because as we've always indicated, we spend this money and we think this is very important because we think these populations are important indicators of the health of the Kiowa Island ecology. But also, second, there have been, I think, more frequently specific issues and concerns about some of these populations, some good, some bad. Jim is I think, going to highlight some issues with respect to our bobcat population, which I know is near and dear to the hearts of almost everybody on Kiowa. In a different way, he's going to talk about the deer population, which isn't necessarily so near and dear to everybody on Kiowa, but to a lot of people. And then alligator population, which is always important to us. He's not making any specific recommendations out of this, but I think what we are wanting to do is to set some background and some framework for the potential that we may be asking Jim to come back later in the fall with some more specific recommendations about these populations. So again, this is primarily his background, but there are some concerns and issues that I think he'll get into. So Jim, I hope I set that up right.
Yeah, you got it about right. Thank y'all for having me here today. So again, I'm gonna give kind of an overview of the Kiowa ecosystem, and then focus on some of the more important species or the ones that typically play a very important role in the ecosystem out here. And so before I get to that, I'll just start with, well, what is an ecosystem? Well, an ecosystem is a large community of living things, that's plants, animals, microbes, insects, everything that live in a particular area. So every living thing on Kiowa is part of our ecosystem. And so our ecosystem is all linked together, right? Certain things, larger animals eat smaller animals, those smaller animals need water and other nutrients to survive. So it's all part of this giant ecosystem. And so obviously ecosystems are very complex, right? It's not a very simple interaction to look at. So biologists, when they're studying an ecosystem, they tend to focus on two types of species. And you've probably heard me mention these two in the past, but those are keystone and indicator species. So in today's presentation, I'm pretty much going to focus on keystone species. And so those are species that normally sit at the very top of the ecosystem. They're vital to keeping that ecosystem running, and they can actually change the ecosystem. They can change the habitat very rapidly with their behavior. And so the ones I'm going to focus on today are bobcats. I'm going to touch on coyotes a little bit, talk about deer and alligators, and then, just briefly, indicator species are another group that we study, and so these may not play as large of a role in the ecosystem, but they tell us something about the health of that ecosystem. So these are things like migratory songbirds, marsh sparrows. They live in the salt marsh. They tell us about how healthy our salt marsh is. Painted buntings are good indicators of good maritime scrub shrub habitat. Wilson's plovers are beach nesting birds, so they tell us a little bit about the health of our beach. So again, just going to focus on keystone species, and we'll jump right into it with bobcats. So why are they a keystone species? Well, they control deer numbers, other animal populations as well, including rats and mice. They're also another good biological buzzword. They're an umbrella species. So they're at the very top of the food chain, and they need a lot of space, a lot of habitat, a lot of food to survive. And so if you've got them, it's a pretty good chance that most everything underneath it is functioning the right way. Obviously, you know, as the mayor mentioned, bobcats they're an iconic species. People like them. People come here just to see them, and they help, you know, some of our local land trust, you know, drive their conservation efforts, and hopefully the individual efforts of homeowners too, because of their love for bobcats. So what's going on with bobcats right now? It's a little bit alarming. Numbers seem to be declining. First we've seen of this in 20 years of research. So this year we put radio collars, GPS tags on 6 bobcats. In February, 4 are dead already. Very unusual. It's unusual for us to lose 1 bobcat, one of our collared bobcats, so to lose 4 in a year is very disconcerting. Another thing that suggests that numbers are going down is that when we're trapping to put these collars on, we normally catch a lot of juvenile bobcats. So those are cats that were born the preceding spring. They normally represent about 40 to 50% of the animals that we catch. This year we didn't catch any. So that would suggest that recruitment reproduction had a bad year last year. Sightings are down from residents. The bobcats that we do have collared are roaming over a larger area. And then we'll talk about deer here in just a minute, but another indicator that bobcats are declining is that deer numbers are going up. So why is that happening? Well, loss of habitat, increased human disturbance, more getting hit by cars. We think 2 of the 4 that died this year were killed by cars. The 3rd we don't know about, and the 4th one last Thursday is actually, we sent it off to a disease lab to try to figure out what happened to it. We think it could have been diseased. It showed no injuries of any kind, so I threw disease up there as a possible reason. So what can we do? It's a little bit tricky, but just kind of highlight a few areas where we might be able to reverse this trend. So one would be obviously to preserve and protect vital bobcat habitat. We know where that is. We've got great research that tells us, you know, if you read our bobcat management guidelines, it identifies areas we call IBAs, which are important bobcat areas that are really vital to this species. So trying to preserve, protect more of those is helpful. Controlling invasive species like tallow tree in these areas can help as well. And then creating new bobcat habitat. And now that's difficult on an island like Kiowa, but that's a big reason behind the town's New Grow Native initiative, which you've heard me talk about a couple of times. But the idea is that, okay, you are losing habitat, so where can we put it back? And so the more native plants that folks can put in their backyards and that others can put in common areas, you know, we can offset some of that loss. And then obviously it's important to continue monitoring and research bobcats. All right, do you want to ask questions as we go, or do you want to wait till the end?
Why don't we, any preference?
I mean, if you have specific bobcat questions, I'm happy.
We'll hold them till the end.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
All right, so I'll just touch on coyotes real quick. Again, they're a keystone species. They behave in the environment very similar to bobcats. Historically, we didn't have coyotes. We had red wolves here. We wiped out the red wolves, and coyotes have slowly made their way west or made their way east from out west and are now present throughout the U.S. They can do some good things just like bobcats. They get a bad rap, but they can certainly control deer numbers and lots of other smaller creatures as well. They are a misunderstood species. Most people don't like them. They're scared of them, but they are now a natural part of our environment, and I like to view it that way. And I threw this little graph up here. You may not be able to see it, but it's a study done in the 80s that looked at the animals most liked by people and the most disliked by people. No surprise, dogs, horses, robins, swans, and butterflies people really like. The one they hate the most are cockroaches. And then you've got mosquitoes, rats, wasps. Anyway, coyotes and wolves come in on that list. And there's been a lot of research on this. Some of them say, some researchers say it's just an inherent fear of a wolf-like creature, and maybe it's from, reading Little Red Riding Hood or The Three Little Pigs as kids, but everyone's scared of the big bad wolf, and coyotes kind of fall into that. So just real quick on coyotes, their population right now is very low. They first arrived in 2009. We saw them in 2009. First sighting by a resident was in 2010. Their numbers went up substantially, 2012 through 2013. By 2014, numbers started trending down, and now we haven't had a sighting of a coyote in 3 or 4 years. So we probably still have a pair here. So why are numbers down? Well, we've got an established pair likely living on the island, and they're keeping other coyotes out. It also is possible that disease played a role in dropping those numbers down when they got really high. What can we do? We really don't need to do anything. Continue to monitor sightings and see what the numbers do. All right, get to deer now. Again, they're a keystone species, not because they eat things further down the food chain, animals and that sort of thing. Obviously, they're plant eaters, but they can change the environment and the habitat in which they live by what they eat. They can eat every little tree that pops up, and then you won't have a forest 50 years later. And they can also, as I'm sure many homeowners can attest, they can do some damage to landscape plantings. Again, they're a popular species. People like them. They do have some public safety issues. We hit them with our cars, and there are some diseases that deer are involved in, such as Lyme disease and ehrlichiosis, that can be transmitted to people. So where are we at with deer? Population is up. Our numbers were pretty high in the late 90s. That's when I first started here, actually mid 90s. Numbers were very high back then. We brought numbers down through a combined effort of a fertility control study we were involved in. We were collecting adult females as part of the research project. And then bobcat started playing a heavier role back then too. So numbers since 2003 have been pretty stable until recently. And our surveys in 2018 are the highest that we've seen. So why? Well, it's likely directly tied to bobcats. Either a decline in bobcat population numbers, which is what we think is going on, or simply just a temporary adjustment in that. So don't want to show too much data, but I thought it'd be good just to kind of show you. So we do these surveys, we're counting these animals. Well, what does the data look like? How do we analyze it? So this is a graph that shows the density of deer on the island. This is done with 2 sets of spotlight surveys every year. And you can see, again, in the late 90s, our numbers were pretty high. We were up around 90 deer per square mile. We dropped a lot. And then we've been pretty stable, pretty much. I mean, it's a little bit of an increasing trend over the last 10, 12 years, but then a big spike here in the last 2 years, especially last year. But it's never as simple as, okay, deer numbers are up. Well, then we want to know, well, why are they up? What's going on? And so another thing we can look at is what we call the recruitment rate, or the number of fawns that are added to the population. So we look at something called fawn to doe ratios, which are up here in orange now. And so that is pretty much what drives the deer population, right? If a lot of fawns are born and a lot of fawns survive, then your numbers go up, right? If a lot of fawns get eaten by bobcats, then your numbers probably stay stable. So you see a pretty good correlation between fawn to doe ratios and deer populations. You'll notice in 2017 that we had our highest fawn to doe ratio to date. 2016 was our second highest ever. So in 2016 and 2017, a lot of fawns survived. And so that's right after that is when you start to see the population go up. One potentially good thing is that in 2018, our fawn to doe ratio was back where it normally is, around 0.3. So what can we do? Well, we need to continue, obviously, to monitor the population. We're talking about potentially a homeowner survey to gauge perceptions and tolerance towards deer that homeowners have. What kind of damage are they seeing? What do they feel about deer? Would they like to see less, more, the same, that sort of thing? And then we'd work towards developing a population management plan, but we'd want to look at our 2019 numbers first. And then if we decided that we needed to remove deer, we needed to reduce the population, the best, most efficient strategy is to lethally remove a number using sharpshooting. It does require permits and some specialized equipment, but it can be done fairly easily and inexpensively. All right, alligators are the last one we're going to touch on. Again, a keystone species. Also iconic. People like to see alligators. Public safety risk. Yes, they are a potential risk to people, especially when you feed them. Population is stable. With an asterisk, maybe we'll touch on that in just a minute, but relatively stable. In terms of management of alligators, we remove some alligators every year using SCDNR tags. That's typically 2 to 6 per year. We've removed 5 so far this year. Feeding and harassment of alligators are ongoing issues. New signage went up in 2017. There's a little picture of the new sign there. And so how many alligators do we have? Well, similar to deer, we do spotlight surveys at night and generate a density of alligators. So this graph shows the number of alligators per 100 acres of water. As you can see in 2019, which we just completed those last week, we've got our highest number to date, though we think it may be a little bit of a flyer. We will see. But again, you know, so again, this is the density of alligators, but it's important to realize that, right, these aren't all large alligators. So what I put up there now is, of the alligators we saw in this survey, how many of them were less than 6 feet? So pretty small alligators, not breeding age, not considered dangerous to people. In our latest survey, 78% of these alligators are under 6 feet. So only about 20% of the alligators this year are over 6 feet. And the other thing that you will notice in this graph is that the percentage of small alligators, or the number of small alligators, is what drives the alligator population density. So that the number of adult alligators probably isn't changing that much. You're seeing these fluctuations based on when you have really good recruitment years. You get a lot of little alligators out there. Of course, most of them get eaten. Not many of them make it to adult size. So you get these spikes when you have really good recruitment. And that's what we're seeing right now. Lots of alligators in the 2 to 3 foot range. So these are alligators born in the last year or two. So what can we do? Continue spotlight surveys and research on alligators. We've got a couple of studies going on right now, one with Clemson, and then we've got an internal study that we're doing with the Community Association. We're talking about potentially some new surveys and monitoring techniques to get a little better data on the population distribution and size. We're going to be looking again at our protocol for removing aggressive alligators. Going to be setting up a little joint working group that the mayor is setting up with some of the other entities, just to make sure we're all on the same page on that. And then the question is, well, would you ever manage alligator numbers? Probably not, but never say never. But alligator populations do a great job of managing themselves. When lots of little ones are born, they get eaten by the big ones. So they pretty much control themselves. And it's rare that you really need to reduce numbers, or you need to remove alligators to keep the population stable. Okay, and then this is my last one, and I threw this one in there. It is wildlife related, but it came up in the last week, and you know, it's something that is a little bit concerning to me. Apparently, and I don't know, there may be folks here that have these mosquito misting systems in their yard. But the ARB let us know about a couple going in recently. A lot of new homes these days have them. And these things are a little bit troubling in that, you know, depending on how they're set up, they dispense a lot of insecticide on a daily basis on this island. Their effectiveness at actually reducing mosquito numbers, which is what they're supposed to do, is questionable. But they kill everything. They kill bees, our pollinators, they kill moths, butterflies, extremely toxic to fish. So if these are sprayed near a pond, and even if they're not directed towards the pond, you've got the wind blowing, they can get into the pond and kill fish. They're also not labeled for use when people, pets, or food are present. So obviously if you had a situation where these are going off in a backyard and someone's walking by, you've got potential impacts there. We looked into this, KICA did back in 2007, passed a regulation and then rescinded that regulation. So currently there are no regulations on these systems. So at the very least, it's something I'd like to look into, probably bring to the environmental committee, and just wanted to make you guys aware of it ahead of time.
Jim, what about the companies that are on the island, like Mosquito Authority is one that comes to mind. They spray from a backpack, basically. Is that of the same concern that these are, or is that different?
So not as much. So the way these systems work is typically there's an underground or an above ground tank. It can be 50 to 200 gallons. It contains some sort of insecticide. Typically it's a pyrethrin or a permethrin product. But anyway, it's a contact insecticide. So it kills on contact. And so they would have nozzles all around the periphery of their yard in these installations, all connected with hoses and pipes. And then the systems are set up to spray at certain times of day. They can be changed. But normally, for them to operate correctly, you would want them to spray just before daylight and just after dark, which is, like the community association uses a similar insecticide when they drive around in their truck and fogger, but they do that early in the morning before daylight. Mosquitoes are active, but the native pollinators are not. So bees, moths, butterflies are hiding somewhere and they're not going to be negatively impacted. But with these systems, often they're automated, so they're spraying all the time, whether people are present or not. And they can also be triggered to go off during the day. So the issue is with a system that has a lot of insecticide and isn't following the protocol for that insecticide, right? It's just spraying it every day, whether conditions warrant it or not, right? So when KICA goes out and spray, they do it based on mosquito count. So they know that mosquitoes are high in a certain area, so they go spray insecticide there. Obviously, these systems don't do that. They're just constantly spraying every day.
Let me try to rephrase the question then. The guys who are running a business to fog your yard, are they using the same chemical?
Probably. But again, they'd be doing it once, maybe every 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
About every 3 or 4 weeks.
Right, and of course they're trained and they're putting it in the right place. They're not spraying it into the water. They're not spraying it outside of the boundaries of the property.
So those are of less concern
less
to
of
you
a concern
than
to
a
me
misting system
than
would
these
be.
automated systems.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, questions?
The other question I have is going back to near the beginning, and you mentioned invasive species are difficult for bobcats. I live where there's a lot of tallow trees, and of course the new ones keep coming up. Why are they so bad on the habitat for the bobcat?
Yeah, so where our tallow trees tend to be most prevalent are in larger areas of typically a freshwater wetland habitat, but they are areas that bobcats utilize heavily. So if these areas convert, which until we started controlling tallow trees, a lot of these areas had basically turned into a tallow tree forest. So there was no understory, it was nothing but giant tallow trees. So once you kill them, then obviously you get low growing stuff that bobcats like. It's where their food is, and they can utilize these areas. So these areas would rapidly degrade in habitat quality if we don't keep controlling tallows.
Okay. A couple of questions on bobcats. If, in fact, as we've always learned, that they are both an important species from a control standpoint for other animals, and they clearly are an iconic part of the Kiowa brand, is there an option, and do communities ever import and try to bring new bobcats into their environment to try to replenish the supply? Is that an option?
But potentially, yes. It's been done. It's been done a few places. I mean, going back 10 or 15 years, I probably had a dozen calls from communities saying, can we have a few of your bobcats? I haven't given them any. But, you know, there was a place in Georgia, Cumberland Island National Seashore, where they reintroduced bobcats from the mainland. It worked really well. It can work as long as there's good habitat, right? If there's enough habitat to support bobcats, they'll do fine there. So if the issue is disease or something like that that is killing our bobcats, then potentially reintroducing them could help. If it's just what we can expect in terms of bobcat numbers based on how much habitat we currently have available, then bringing in new ones wouldn't help.
'Cause the
Right?
habitat's not
They
gonna
just
be there,
leave, right? They wouldn't have a space to go.
And on the question of deer, you know, all of my input from residents is always anecdotal if we don't have any, but my sense is that, that any effort we ever made to manage deer would get a pretty divided population. That we have a number of residents who are concerned that we are overpopulated with deer. They're concerned about it both from a public safety standpoint. You know, any of us who drive back on the island at 11 o'clock at night, you know, you've got to keep one foot on the brake because you don't know what's going to happen.
Sure.
And the impact just on the environment, the amount of vegetation they eat. But we also know that these are beloved animals, and any recommendation to manage the population would similarly draw an understandable real concern about that, because it's not something Kiowa has ever done.
Sure.
I know that other communities do manage that population. Do you have a sense of how they evaluate that, and what finally triggers them to do that? Is it public sentiment? Is there some population level that would drive you to make that sort of recommendation?
Yeah, so it's I could give a whole nother talk on deer and how do you determine when you regulate numbers or not, but the quick answer is that you reduce deer numbers when they go above carrying capacity. But there are three types of carrying capacity. There's biological carrying capacity, so that's when there's so many that the deer are unhealthy. And then there's ecological carrying capacity, so there's so many where they're changing the habitat for the negative. And then there's social carrying capacity, and that's how many deer the residents are willing to tolerate. And all of those are valid reasons to reduce deer numbers.
Okay.
Which is why why I think the homeowner survey would be helpful, because that's one thing we can quantify the other two, but we can't quantify the social carrying capacity for deer.
And you're going to be surveying and identifying that?
I would like to do it, planning to do it. I just need to get Stephanie to help me with it, so.
You got
The
that.
other step. Yeah.
Okay.
You can help too, though.
Any other questions? All right, Jim,
Thank
thanks.
you.
I appreciate
That
it.
was very
Thank you.
good.
While we're getting ready to go to the next item, the only other thing I do want to add, because Jim alluded to it, is back about when was the Walt Disney World incident? About 4 years ago? 2016. So I think most of you know, several years ago there was a very unfortunate incident at Walt Disney World. And after that occurred, the town, the community association, and the resort, and I think actually the developers may have been involved also, but certainly those three entities, to sit down as communities did that had alligator populations to make sure that we were doing the right things to manage and understand alligator safety. And out of that became a number of changes in terms of our signage, our communication to residents, to visitors, our education of people about alligator behavior. A number of things were done internally between the community association, the resort, and the town to ensure that we had trained personnel who could deal with issues and complaints about aggressive alligators. I think we got more aggressive about enforcement of human behavior when people were feeding and doing other things. That's been several years now, and during that time, this island's gotten more crowded. There are more people, not necessarily more alligators, but a lot more opportunities for interaction. So we do have, and Jim alluded to this, I've asked for a very efficient study to be done, I'll call it an audit of our current practices and policies around alligator management to be done. It's going to be because the resort, the town, and the community association all have involvement in this. It's going to be co-led by Mary Ann Connolly, our council member. Liz King is representing the resort. You can wave, Liz. And Ben Cheatham, who's the chair of the Community Association Board. And what they are going to do, and obviously they're going to rely on and involve Jim from the town, Matt from Kika, our public safety people like Yvonne and whatever. But what I've asked them to do is essentially start with, well, what did we do following 2016? Let's take a good look at things like our signage, our communication to residents, to visitors. Let's look at our educational material. Let's make sure that we do have the right number of people. I think, Jim, in the last 2 weeks, we've had to remove how many alligators? 5? All because of aggressive alligator calls or concerns. So, you know, it unfortunately does at times become frequent. We just did one right outside Andale Inn. And they are going to look at the question of managing the alligator population and whether there are any situations where we might want to very selectively manage that population, not necessarily island-wide, but maybe in key areas where you have a lot more interaction between visitors and people. So those three, I think, then they're going to get started on that, and the intent is that they would I'm hoping that they would have some findings and some conclusions for council at our October meeting. So we're not turning it into a huge study. I mean, I think we're starting in a good place, but we've asked them to kind of audit what we're doing and make sure that we are doing the right things to ensure that everybody is able to interact with our alligator population appropriately. So, Jim, thanks. Let's move on to, we have an ordinance approval and an associated public hearing. So the next item is to consider approval of ordinance 2019-6, which is an ordinance to amend the comprehensive plan of the town of Kiowa Island to adopt changes resulting from the flood mitigation sea level rise adaptation report. John Taylor is going to present an overview of this. Then this does require, so we will then move into a public hearing. Once we finish the public hearing, which could last 30 seconds or an hour, we will then close the public hearing, and then this will be put in front of the council for vote on a first reading. And just as a very fast background, this resulted from the subcommittee that the town sponsored a year ago, which looked at and I think produced an outstanding and very detailed report about the potential future impact of sea level rise on the broader community. As part of that, one of the things that we asked the the Planning Commission to do is to take a look at the comprehensive plan and where appropriate, edit and add in and make some adjustments in the comprehensive plan to consider possible impact of sea level rise. This is not everything that will generate activity on the island over sea level rise. Kika is very involved right now in issues around looking at their drainage and their roads. We're looking at our road heights. The Conservancy is looking at issues. So this is not to capture everything. But it is just one step in beginning to consciously think about this. So, John, I'll let you overview this.
Thank you. So just following along with the comments of Mayor, the Planning Commission started with a work group that consisted of a few members of the Planning Commission, and we invited former members of that committee that was adopted through the Environmental Committee, the Flood Mitigation and Sea Level Rise Adaptation Group. And that working group sat together and drafted the language that you see, the proposed amendments within the comprehensive plan. And so I'll just show a summary of what's proposed in those amendments and then provide an additional action and strategy update on that was provided in addition to the recommendations provided through the goals of the Planning Commission. So those were two main drivers from what council had established back at the end of 2018 to provide sort of a roadmap, if you will, coming out of the significant report that was produced by the committee. And so just the approach of that working group, those initial sessions really were to gather input and make sure that the group really understood what the report said and really understood the direction of the recommendations that were outlined within the report, and to become familiar. It started with open dialogue, and the group really identified some key takeaways and recommendations on areas of focus that would sort of parallel with the comprehensive plan goals existing elements. Retaining that, two things that you would continue to keep in mind, that the comprehensive plan in nature is really broad, and so it gives you a overarching theme, if you will, and so there wasn't an approach to specifically identify out of the 140 plus recommendations within the report, not to specifically pull recommendations from the Sea Level Rise report, but to really focus on big, large general themes that the town council could really move forward through various different action steps through coordination with other entities as well. And so we know that as well, there's some other things that may be tied to the comprehensive update, but this particular approach was really just to focus on sea level rise and flood mitigation. And so that would be, anything else would be tagged on into our tasks of next year. So some of those focus areas that were identified specifically from the elements would be the natural resources, community facilities, transportation, and land use. And from those, these are the sort of themes that were brought out to really focus on sort of an action or a strategy to present some additional goals. Council, within your books, you should see the formal red line document that addresses these sort of specific things. So I won't walk you through those. But beyond the actual focus areas of goals, the strategy action plan document was something that would help council prepare themselves a little bit more to identify what would be next, if you will, as an action step. And so there are a lot of goals that were produced from the comprehensive plan, but the specific vision and strategy document produced these 5 action or strategies that focus a little bit more in detail towards implementation, if you will, towards sea level rise mitigation, flood mitigation, and sea level rise impact. And so those being protecting the key natural resources, the beach being the prime sort of beauty of Kiowa, and including that, adding the marsh. And so one of those key things was to look at establishing a marsh management plan as part of one of the implementations for protecting the key natural resources. And I'm just going to pull a few of those from each of those, not necessarily go through all of the specific goals or action steps that are tied to a timeline or specific end date between 2019 and 2020. Maintaining and improving the current infrastructure. We know the Parkway was one of a heavily being discussed and sort of underway. But that conversation of what the design and transportation network for the island and what steps need to be made in place to maybe either raise certain areas of the island as far as a transportation network or making specific adjustments to that infrastructure to sustain flood mitigation in the future. That also includes commitment to working with a lot of the other public and private entities on the island, because those are partnership and coordination levels of a lot of the infrastructure, working with Berkeley, KIU, and all of these other entities who control a lot of the infrastructure, making sure that the town is aware of what those plans, what their future plans are, share to ensure that infrastructure is sustained through a significant impact. And so do we raise equipment? Those are the type questions that would be coming out of identifying and improving infrastructure and community services Promoting community resiliency, and that word resiliency is always thrown out there. That word, if you've had a chance to look at the City of Charleston's action and strategy plan for their flood mitigation efforts and sea level rise, they heavily also use the word resiliency, but it's really just being able to sort of manage the threats and that sustain access to what has been perceived as a threat naturally. And so that specifically for us would be looking at our existing zoning and building codes. Shall we raise the freeboard? Those are questions that would help promote sustainable development patterns or strategies. And the final, I think, is key, is just educating our public and educating residents and visitors the importance of this effort. And so that's really all I have to sort of summarize the specific. In your materials, there's specific sort of a timeline that attaches sort of a goal of when some of those items should be reviewed or looked upon. But I sort of close with that, yeah.
All right. All right, John, thank you. With that, do I need a motion to open the public hearing, or can I just do it? All right, do I have a motion to move into a public hearing?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Second. All right. So with that, we will open a public hearing for the adoption of ordinance 2019-06 to amend the comprehensive plan. If anybody here has any comments, what I would ask you to do is just step up to the podium, identify yourself, and we would love to hear from you.
Wendy Kulik, 38 Marsh Edge Lane. As I've said before, I think this issue is one of the most important issues that the town has ever addressed, and it's been doing it in a very, very comprehensive way, involving people who are educated, experts, or have experience in the area, which makes the recommendations that come out all that more important. The only concern I have is that this is August, and we have a significant percentage of the population of Kiowa who's still away for the summer. And so I don't know if you plan to have something similar before the second reading, or get word out to people so that if there are questions, and even if people can't be here, they could submit them, say, to Stephanie, and she could bring them, you know, to the next council meeting so that they could be addressed. But given all the hard work that's gone into this, I would hate for there to end up being negative feedback because of the time of year at which this is all occurring. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right. With that, I will close the public hearing.
So moved.
And so then I would ask for a motion to adopt on first reading ordinance 2019-06.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion, comments? And again, I would highlight the fact that this does take two readings, so we certainly have the opportunity between now and the second reading, either because of any input that we get from the public, from any of the other entities that are looking at this, that we have the ability at second reading to make adjustments. So, all right, we have a motion, a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, it is approved. Thank you. Thank you, John. Old business, communication and implementation plan for the plastics ordinance. This is just a quick update. I think, as you all know, the ordinance takes effect the second week in September.
The 8th?
And we have had a number of activities underway to make sure that the community, our residents, our businesses are fully aware of the ordinance and answering questions. Stephanie Braswell has prepared this presentation. This is her work, but she is unable to be here today, so Stephanie, our town administrator, is going to go through this. And we'll do every bit
I'll
as
do
good
my
with it.
best.
Yeah. Go for it, thanks.
Okay, thanks. As the mayor said, the ordinance was adopted by council, but it's not effective until September 8th. And Stephanie was charged with putting together a communication plan to roll out this information to get the word out to our businesses, our residents, and our guests. And so what you'll have in front of, what you have in front of you is the excellent work that she has done and continues to do up to that date. The audience that she has put together this presentation, other materials for, of course, is the business, residents, and visitors. The goal is to inform the public about our plastic ordinance that will come into effect on September 8th. And what does the ban mean, as well as the ban on the beach, and how is that different from the regular plastic ban on the island. What she's done is she has, in June, she has disseminated information out. As you can see, the last 3 months, she sent it to the press, Channel 2, 4, and 5, and Post and Courier. We've received little coverage with regards to the local channels, and so I know she's reaching back out to them this month to resend the information, and she's going to do that 1 week prior to the effective date. But she's also have reached out to them just in the last couple weeks, just saying, hey, by the way, council has adopted an ordinance. Please go to the website to take a look. And if you have any questions, to direct the questions to her or to Jim Jordan, who can answer those questions. Those two have really been probably the key in terms of fielding questions from businesses or residents or guests. But she is working hard to get the word out throughout the community.
It's been a little bit of an issue that's caused confusion, because up until even a couple of weeks ago, there have been TV news stories on plastics bans, and they'll go, now the communities who have this are Sullivan's Island, Isle of Palm, Folly Beach, Charleston, and they don't mention Kiowa.
And they don't mention us.
And the problem is that then for our property owners watching it, they now get confused and go, well, I thought we passed one.
Right.
How come they didn't?
And they even mentioned last week, as I was driving in, Seabrook is
they-
looking at it, but they never mentioned
But they didn't
Kiowa.
mention
So
Kiowa, so
Stephanie is working hard to get.
So we're trying to make sure that
to get that
the
word
news
out.
people get clarified that we have this policy. Yeah.
That's correct. She's working really hard with Julie and Trish at Freshfields. A lot of the merchants, I think, already have started the transition, if not completed that transition. And Jim can probably speak more on this. I think when I talked with him today, the only two businesses that I know that may have contacted him just for clarification was Vincent's and Harris Teeter, and I think he's worked out those issues or concerns with them. But she's working with the resort and the club and our business license holders. This is the communications between her and Keeley, who's over sitting where Stephanie normally sits. They put together this great public information that we're going to post at Freshfields. As you know, their kiosks are going to allow us to slide it in to one of those pockets there. They're working with, I know, Beachwalker Park, which is a great location to be able to advertise the flyers. Of course, on the website, we have a great FAQ page. And it looks like we're going to be sending out some formal notice and flyers issued by email to our business license holders and rental agencies. So they are working very hard to get the word out to the business community. And as I already talked about with Freshfields, what they're doing in terms of the information that they're disseminating out and working with the resort and Kika have been notified and already made the switch and working through their inventory. We've notified the club, and she is going to send out reminders a week prior to the 8th. Public, for the residents and visitors, this is information. We are working to get signage because we believe, of course, that is the best way to get our message out. And so we have an opportunity to work with the community association in terms of boardwalks, and I'll show you in a second what that messaging will look like. Also with the regime in terms of their boardwalks, and I know she's also looking at, of course, KIGR's boardwalk and private boardwalks as well. So as you can see, there's about 41 boardwalks that we have the opportunity to get our message out. And as you can see on the left side, that's what we're looking at in terms of the messaging. We've already got the approval from ARB. We worked really close with Shannon at Kika and ARB, so we're really happy that we're able to work out the details and get a sign that we're pleased with and ARB is also pleased with. So as you can see, this is on the left is currently the sign, and we're going to be going to the new sign. There we're showing the signs that will be installed in terms of West Beach 11, and the East Beach permit signs will not be installed until 2020. But that's, again, just taking a look at the signs. We're going to have some temporary signs that we're going to put in place until the permanent signs are ready, and so that is just showing you what the temporary signs will look like. And then currently the permission that she's been given in terms of signage, which is Beachwalker Park's been granted, KIGR is granted, and she's currently working with the regimes to try to get permission to put the signs up. If for some reason we can't work with some of the regimes, we're going to be looking at other options in terms of putting some sort of imprint on the walkway itself. Right now, she has sent out for quotes. We've only received one back from a company for those signs. Right now, we're looking at about $11,000. So once she has all that information, it will come through the proper channels to get approval or ask for approval for those signs. But right now, we're looking at about $11,000. And of course, this money can come out of restricted funds because it's tourism related. I'm hoping 100%, but I'm not sure. Well, work with DeRoda on that. And the public communication that this is in Town Notes front page, Island Connections, and it's going to be a rerun this month. Kika's Digest, Natural Kia was going to have an article for us in September, and then the activity guide update in January. And this is just showing you some digital and display in terms of the things that she's done. And as you can see, she's been working hard since this was adopted, and will continue this push through September. Other communications is through Turtle Patrol cars, going to be redesigned. And then My Charleston, going to update the beach page. We're going to include that information on My Charleston once that beach page is updated. I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but Beach Patrol, they have these little great cars that they can hand out. And so that's what she's referring to when she's talking about updating those cards. That I believe they're really come in handy, and I'm guessing they use them a lot. So that's just another tool in our toolbox in terms of getting the message out. This is My Charleston that will have, she's showing you there how many copies will be distributed, and we'll have the beach rules displayed on that. And in the future, through short-term rental rules and regulations, maybe add some sort of slicker with regards to our policies. That's one of the things that we're working on right now is a short-term rental update on that ordinance. And one of the things that she would like to do is once that's completed, to be able to, in a easy, simple way, ask Slicker to be able to have some information for the rental companies. She has gone around already and gotten a copy of what they give to their guests. It's very wordy, and sometimes the message is hidden in all that text. So she would like to clean that up and make it easy and make that available to our rental agencies. And I believe that's it.
So far, Jim, you've had a couple questions. You know, our main goal has been to ensure that when this goes into effect, that we have done as good a job as we can, not only in communication, but, you know, where there are questions about what's covered, not covered, that we're getting those answers out. And from your perspective, has that slowed down in terms of the number of questions we're getting?
Yeah, absolutely. We had 2 or 3 questions from Harris Teeter, and then 1 quick question from Vincent, but it's been a couple of weeks.
And the one thing, since I see a couple commercial entities sitting here, you know, we did amend before the second final reading the ordinance to, while I'm not encouraging this by raising it, to put a provision in there that if a commercial entity needed additional time for implementation around a particular aspect, that there was an avenue to request and have that reviewed. So I just want to remind all of those entities that if they are looking to have a additional time around implementation, they need to make sure between now and September 9th, they get in that request. It's not automatic, that you need to come and tell us what it is and get that approved. So if there are any, make sure that they get into Jim and from there to the environmental committee team that looks at it. Any thoughts, comments? What's the sense of the council here?
I thought it looked good.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty comprehensive.
I have one question. Harris Teeter, I heard they were getting rid of their plastic bags, that they're phasing them out. Is that true?
I assume so.
They should be
Okay.
getting rid of it.
I think they're phasing them out by fobbing them off on shoppers, because I did a little shop today, and actually for the first time, I wasn't even asked, is plastic okay? She just started putting it into plastic bags. So then I had to take her out of the plastic bags again, but, so I suspect they want to get rid of their bags.
I had them change it to a paper bag also, once they started packing it.
All right, any other comments or questions? All right, and I think Stephanie and Keely have done a great job with material. Sometimes you kind of lose track of how much stuff they have to communicate just for something that seems as simple as this. All right, so next old business, a discussion of Kiowa Island Parkway project, road elevation, landscape, architect services. We've got two specific parts of this project that we want to review with you. Do you have, is it going up here or not?
Yeah.
It's okay. Was it now? There are two pieces. I'm going to speak to one, which is the elevation issue, and then Stephanie's going to speak to the other, which is a desire to put out a contract for a landscape architect. If you recall, when we started this project, one of the things that we asked ourselves were if we were going to be doing a potentially multi-million-dollar, very comprehensive repaving and cleanup of the main road from the roundabout to the front gate. Anecdotally, we have always had concerns and heard concerns about whether the elevation of the road, particularly around the Mingo Point curve, was high enough, and whether we ought to take the opportunity at some point in the future to raise that. So we concluded that as part of this project, we would go ahead and do that evaluation. And if in fact there is a positive cost benefit to doing it, it could then be incorporated into the project. So what I want to present to you is the thought process for how we're going to go about making that decision. As background, I would point out the Parkway has always been relatively free of nuisance and major storm flooding. The point there being, we aren't dealing with a road right now that is underwater. Our issue is maybe a little bit different than Kika's issue, where they know that even today they have certain key roads that they can predict will have flooding and surface water at different times. At high tides, the water gets up really, really close and touches the pavement, but we haven't generally had the problem of losing the functionality of the road. However, we do recognize that higher tides are routinely approaching the pavement near the Mingo Point and the real estate center. Both the town and Kika are currently in the process of evaluating what the potential future impact of sea level rise changes might be on our infrastructure. And we recognize that interruption of the parkway accessibility would have a major public safety and economic input. We may only own one road compared to the community association, but I think our road trumps all of theirs, because if ours is not open, nobody gets in and off this island. And so we recognize that maybe the room we have for error is pretty small, because that road is critical and we need to keep it functional. So we did think it was most efficient to study and address it in conjunction with this resurfacing. The contract we have with McCormick allows us to give them 3 scenarios. And by that I mean we will create 3 different potential road elevations that we would like them to do the scoping and general engineering scoping and pricing around. so that we can understand if we were to raise that road, for example, to a mean sea level of 6 feet, what would that mean? What parts of the road are less than that? What would the engineering approach to be, and how much would it cost? Because today we have no sense of that. But they will give us three alternatives, which will allow us to evaluate everything from there's no value in doing anything, there's no given that we would make any change at all, to evaluating that here is in fact a change that would buy a significant benefit for the cost. Next slide. So Lucas Hernandez, who is currently the resilience officer for KICA, but he worked with our subcommittee on the sea level rise and did all of a lot of the technical work for that project. He has been working with us on trying to think through what are some of the scenarios that we would want to have McCormick look at. And so and what I'm going to be looking for here is some sense of, are we looking at this, do you think, right? Are we looking at it wrong? Would you have some different views? So we're really trying to do two things. We're saying we want to make sure that this road remains unaffected by nuisance flooding over the next 20 years. So we're saying, okay, it isn't really today being impacted by nuisance flooding. Let's look out for the potential. This is essentially a sea level rise scenario. So if you believe sea level rise is going to occur over the next 20 years to any degree, if you're not being flooded today, how much do you think you need, how much additional elevation do you think you need to ensure that over the next 20 years, that still will be the case? We still aren't going to see flooding. The 20 years comes from the fact that for planning purposes, we're assuming that the life of this project is 20 years, that in 20 years, we could potentially be back repaving the road, relooking at issues. If we don't do something now, we can do it 20 years from now. The second scenario we're looking at is what I'll call a storm scenario. That says the other thing that we want to assure is that during a tropical storm scenario that the road is functional in two situations. One, that it's functional long enough that we're allowing access for a reasonable period of time immediately pre-storm in order to enable evacuation. And that post-storm we have access to the road quickly enough to allow for post-storm recovery, emergency recovery crews. The point of that is we're not talking about raising the road high enough that it would be high and dry through a storm, that it only be high and dry during enough time prior to the storm that we could reasonably have enough time to ensure evacuation, and that we try to get people back in. So that really involves making some assumptions about looking at history, different levels of pre-storm surge, what you might see in the 12 to 8 hours prior to a certain level storm, and on the presumption that worst case the storm's coming at high tide. And then since we get one more, we're looking at a combination. So we're essentially saying, all right, let's test the same storm scenario, but let's also add the 20 years of sea level rise to it. So let's look outward further and say, in a storm situation, 20 years from now, what level of elevation would we want to ensure functionality of the road, both with the storm surge and the fact that over those 20 years you may have also had, higher sea levels. So that's the approach that we're taking. What Lucas is now doing is actually working with McCormick LiDAR data to then come up with specific elevations that we would test. So what we would not be coming back and says, well, we're recommending to raise the road 3 feet. What we'll be saying is we're recommending that the minimum elevation be 7.2 feet or whatever it is, mean sea level. He's creating, the survey work's going on, he's creating those scenarios. McCormick would then develop the cost and engineering evaluation for consideration by the staff. The idea is once we have that back from McCormick, we would review it first with the Public Works Committee. And then from that, the next step would be a recommendation to town council, probably, hopefully in September. Can't be any later than October. And that recommendation could be anything from, we've looked at this and we recommend no re-elevation of the road, or it could be a recommendation in any one of those scenarios. The importance of September is because this re-elevation is on the critical path of the road project. If we do not re-elevate the road, then the intent will be to repave all of the parkway prior to the 2021 PGA. So it'll be done during the fall, winter of 2021. If we are going to re-elevate the road, this portion of the project will most likely have to occur as a separate project after the PGA because of the amount of permitting that would be required, because we're going to be touching marsh. So that's partly background, partly I'm looking for a sense before Lucas does any more work of whether that appears to, whether the council's comfortable that when we come to you in September and say, here's a recommendation, and it's based upon this sort of intent, have we captured what you will want to see? Any discussion?
It appears that there could be sections, for example, that require significant work in permitting. In that case, we know we're going to have to, even if the road were paved prior to the PGA, that would have to be redone after the fact, or it may not be repaved.
Yeah, what would most likely occur if we decided to raise the road is that most likely prior to the PGA we would do all of the repaving from the roundabout to as close, and the presumption here is that where the road's going to be raised is some distance between the Mingo Point entrance and the real estate center. So we would do as much of the final project repaving from the roundabout all the way to as close to Mingo as we could get. And the remainder would probably be some cosmetic and functional cleanup, just to clean it up a little bit for the remainder. And then the next year we would come back in and do the rest of that, project.
Makes sense.
Does this sound all right?
I think you're on the right track. I've done a fair amount of work with Lucas. He's got some wonderful models that I think will inform McCormick what those scenarios would play out at. So I think you're on the right track.
Again, a part of this is because if we go forward and at some point, of course, the road, we aren't designing it to be able to withstand every possible event. And people afterwards will say, well, why I thought you spent $1 million to keep the road dry and it's not dry, and so we need to be clear. Now this is what we were trying to accomplish. So
Are the survey teams the ones we see out on the road today?
Yeah, they're surveying now. All right. The second issue on the road project has to do with landscaping.
Thank you. So in January, I believe, during the town council retreat, some of the things that came up that we talked about had to do with the parkway and the look and feel of the parkway, and the fact that in the last couple storms, especially Irma, it really tore up the parkway because of the fact that it was with the salt coming in and the plantings not being salt resistant, et cetera, that portion that we all know and love as the gateway to the island may need to have some freshen up. And so I was asked probably a couple months ago by the mayor to look at maybe putting together a proposal. And one of the other things that we wanted to do is that since we're looking at the parkway in general for the resurfacing, that this may be the appropriate time to also look at bringing in a professional that can help us look at doing some improvements along the parkway. With this RFP that you have a copy of, if you have no objection, I would put this out within the next week, and Jim Jordan and crew we all worked to put this proposal together. But what we're looking for is to bring in a firm that will look at, as this proposal states, to give a fresh and improve the landscape along the parkway. So this doesn't necessarily mean that their proposal is going to come back and they say tear everything up from the roundabout to the gate. It could be within sections of the parkway. And this particular plan could be potentially in phases, depending on if council wanted to go with any proposal. We may have some that is done prior to the PGA or after the PGA in conjunction with the repaving. Depending on the setback of the plantings, we may be able to go in there and do work while they're doing their resurfacing. So a number of things, but ultimately we've asked them to come back to us with a proposal by January of next year, because if we want to link this with the parkway, we'll have time to do that. And so as you see, their scope that we can see is looking at creating a more resilient native landscape along the parkway, and to incorporate our Grow Native initiative. And I think Jim, in talking about that moments ago, just in general throughout the island, I think the town making a good statement and being the leader in terms of incorporating native plants along the parkway is important, if that's something that we're able to do. We also are going to ask them to look at the salt tolerance plants in the flood prone area. And also we're going to ask them to, as well as McCormick Taylor, to kind of look at some different things that we can combat the tire ruts that we see. They're also going to look at it. So McCormick Taylor may recommend some sort of hard surface, and they may recommend some additional hard surface or landscape to be able to do that. So that's part of, I think, as part of the McCormick plan for the parkway. That's something that we would like to look at, as well as doing a landscape and hardscape along the parkway as well. So we think that this will be two great projects that can work side by side with each
And
other.
I don't think we need a vote to issue the
No, I was
RFP,
just
but
letting you know.
what we wanted to do was make sure that you all were
Aware.
but also generally supportive, because I don't want to come in with a recommendation to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to re-landscape and find there really wasn't an appetite to do that. So so while you're not committing to actually do anything that they recommend, we're at least looking for some sense that you think this is something we ought to take a look at.
I think it's important to really evaluate this and go forward with the plan, because that area has really been impacted, and it looks just so, it's just not attractive as it was before. So I would support this effort.
It may have some positive long-term cost reductions too, if we do it right.
It could.
Because the current landscaping we use is really hard to maintain. Yeah. What's not dead. All right, thank you. So go ahead and you can send it up. All right, new business. To consider approval of the amended and restated development agreement by and between Kiowa Resort Associates and the town of Kiowa Island affecting parcel 13A. And I think, Mark, are you going to provide some introductory comments on this? And I don't think you've got a full presentation, but some introductory comments and at least a little flavor of this. The council members are familiar with the issue, but if you want to do that, go ahead. While he's getting ready to do that, the context here is, I think as everyone knows, that the town entered into a number of years ago, and it has been amended a number of times, the development agreement between the town of Kiowa Island and Kiowa Partners, or Kiowa Resort Associates, I think. And that development agreement manages essentially the rules and regulations around development on the island for property owned by Kiowa Partners. And the parcel we're talking about here is a piece of parcel 13. Parcel 13 for, and I know Mark will show all this, but Parcel 13 is the parcel that is at the farthest east end of the island, just before you get to Beachwalker, to Beachwalker Park.
West End.
Did I say east end, west end? Yeah, okay, that way.
Seems that.
The west end, before you get to Beachwalker, it is a very large parcel. It's one of the sort of remaining largest parcels that we have on the island, and it is the portion of that, the portion we're talking about is a subset, which Mark will describe, that is that portion of the parcel that is essentially abuts the ocean. I only want to remind people that this is an amendment to an agreement, and the agreement itself already lays out the basic allowances that the developer has for building on this. So things like the density, the number of dwelling units, the height of buildings, the land coverage, all of those things. The starting point here in this discussion is what currently is in the development agreement and what rights the developer has. So as people listen to this, there may be some things that they say, well, why are we building something so high? Or why are there this number of dwelling units? And I want to stress that those are entitlements that already exist. They are, so as we listen to this, we need to be very clear about what we're recommending to change versus what already exists. So Mark, I'll let you go.
Okay. Excuse me. Thank you. Mr. Mayor and members of council and those in attendance today. My name is Mark Permar. I'm here along with Townsend Clarkson representing Kiowa Resort Associates, which is the equivalent of Kiowa Partners. It's that part of the agreement that the mayor referred to in the 2013, amended and restated, or restated and amended development agreement. And the reason I cite that, I'm just going to say a few opening words, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nicole Emmons with Hart-Howardson. But since 1994, Kiowa has been structured in such a way in terms of development controls with a series of development agreements. 94, 2005, right, Charlie LaPuma? And 2013, in addition to development agreements associated with the resort. It's been the beneficiary of the island to have a well thought out program of what can happen, how it can be accommodated, and a pace for it. During those periods, since 1994, there have been occasionally up to about 15 amendments to various development agreements that are a result of either updated information that was critical to make adjustments, or as of today, what we're submitting, better thinking. That is, through a series of learning experiences with development patterns over the 40-plus year history of Kiowa, we hopefully are getting better at what all of us do in terms of helping to create a better community. So today, we're making a formal presentation to you of a request before you to amend the text amendment, to have a text amendment to a very, very specific part of the 2013 development agreement. And the reason I cite that is, and we'll go through a brief description of it, it's very narrow in terms of the text change. More specifically, we are requesting an amendment to increase the maximum number of dwelling units per building from up to 7 units in a building to up to 20 units in a building in the R3 zoning classification with special conditions. We're going to go through those conditions, but it's a very narrow, specific request. The backdrop story I'd like to share with you before I turn it over to Nicole is what this is not. This submittal is not in conflict with any of the provisions, if you remember, with KICA about the extension of Duneside Road to access this property. There's no conflict. In fact, it supports and reinforces aspects of that plat approval. And those conditions, if you remember, about density limits and what can access and so forth, all of those remain whole and intact, and you'll see evidence of reinforcing that. The other thing is there are no additional other changes in the development agreement related to height, setbacks, off-street parking, all the other array of standards that are in the development agreement, with the exception of increased and more restrictive standards as it relates to what we're about to share with you. A part of the collaborative process that we've been doing as a the master developer is to work with East-West partners, who you're going to learn a little bit about, and their key design professionals, Hart-Howerton, that the combination of those firms have evaluated along with us a specific array of development scenarios for parcel 13, and in particular 13A. That has, because of that extensive homework over about a 5-month period, we began to see evidence of the merits of this text amendment request that we're proposing for your consideration. And in particular, over a 3.5, almost 4-month period, we began to share that homework that we've done to show evidence of the merits of that. So Nicole's going to go through a brief slideshow to give you backdrop, and then we can come full circle to address any specific questions you may have. So what I'd like to do right now is to introduce Nicole Emmons with Hart-Howerton. She's a principal out of the New York office. So she's in our time zone. They have other offices in other time zones. And the one thing I would like to add about Nicole's background is she's very familiar with our part of the world, very similar to East-West Partners. They've been with us in the greater Charleston area for quite a while, but Nicole and her team have been involved in many aspects of the greater Charleston area, which gives a great running start to understanding the elements that make us so special. We know we're special, right? Well, it helps to have someone that understands that dynamic. And the other aspect of Hart-Howerton is they have done work all over the world, but they have a particular sensibility of planning and designing in uniquely sensitive environments, which we all know designing with nature is our hallmark. So Nicole, let me turn it over to you.
Mark, can I ask one question first for my own clarification? When you say within the R3 zoning classification, is it R3C or is this an R3 pure?
Well, this, you'll hear, for the parcel, it will be R-3/C.
Okay.
So it retains the same zoning classifications, but there's an aspect in the table of uses that assigns certain standards to the R3 category. That's why I sort of highlighted the R3 component to it. But the parcel is still the R-3/C category. The other aspect I forgot to mention is the question that Andy brought up about have we forgotten or are we double counting, or have we allowed and considered the Timbers project? Andy, we have done that, but we'll show you how we've tried to clarify that. If we haven't, we'll definitely clarify it, but that's been integrated appropriately. So Nicole?
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Nicole Emmons from Hart-Howerton in New York. Mark did a great introduction. I almost don't have to do this. But what I'd like to do is share a little bit about who we are as a firm, as a design firm. We're a team of architects, landscape architects, planners, interior designers. And when we approach a project, we approach it from the principles of our firm to design the complete environment, to think about the entire experience of the place, of the setting, and your day-to-day as a guest, as a visitor, as a resident. So as we approach this property and all of our projects, we approach it with that mindset. And as part of that principle, we've had the privilege and the pleasure to work in some of the most wonderful and unique landscapes and settings all over the country and in fact all over the world, many of which are actually in the Low Country. And as Mark said, we've been here. I've been working in the area for about 15 years in particular, and members of our team for 30 years. Hart-Howerton having been parts of projects all over the Low Country and the peninsula and the greater Charleston area, as well as the coastal islands in Georgia and places that you may know, such as out west and California, Hawaii. And some of these places are, in fact, places where we've worked with East-West.
As designers, we have the opportunity only when we have a partner and a client who is interested in going to these places and preserving what brings you there from day one. Looking for ways to take an outlook that as a first visitor you may have, or as a resident every day, and to really consider those aspects of a community, a place, a culture that make it a place that we all want to be a part of. And as East West has grown their business over 30 years in real estate development, they've come to Hart-Howerton to work alongside them in Colorado, California, Hawaii, and Charleston, in the greater Charleston area, including Daniel Island. So we were excited to work with them and Mark and the Kiowa Partners team over the last few months to think about this part of Kiowa Island, this western end, and to really come together with a set of principles and ideas that and challenges that as partners, as development partners, they bring to our design team, and as designers, we bring to the table as well. So you may know their work, their development in Charleston, having been here almost 20 years. The office has been working on projects on the peninsula, Daniel Island, and has a team of locals. Some of them are here today, who live and work in Charleston in the Low Country. When we first started looking at this project, we began, as we do with all projects, which is to take a step back and think about where we are in the world, and in particular, when you're a part of a region, no place is exempt from, even an island is not exempt from being part of a larger area and a larger economic area, ecology, and so forth. So as part of our analysis, we thought about how this island is a part of a larger low country zone, also part of how you enter and how you access the island. We've heard a lot about that today in your meeting, and of course as an experience for a resident or a guest where you might be coming from, typically thinking about, well, what is that journey from the airport or from the peninsula, and just in getting to know the property, we think about the access and the possibility of someone arriving for the first time or the 57th time. As part of that process, we got to know the organization of circulation and streets in the island, on the island, and access beyond the security gate is a route that guest residents would take to this parcel. It comes along Duneside and to parcel 13A, which is the outline in red that you see on the aerial map in front of you. And then thinking, just for those of you who know the construction at the resort that's happening, that's about a half-mile walk along the beachfront to that western end. Looking at the parcel in person and mapping and looking at the topography and looking at the resources, one of the things that really struck us was as the end point, almost an exclamation point to this island at the west end, it's really a marriage of all the wonderful things that the Low Country has to offer, as well as the culture of living on Kiowa Island, having access to the river and the river views, the ocean, and the marsh. So really having a parcel that has the ability to bring people and connect people to the natural landscapes of Kiowa Island, we really see as one of the many opportunities of this parcel as development site, that there's river frontage as well as ocean frontage, and we took an approach that really considered both of those elements of the property. And in thinking about the types of places that we see around Kiowa Island and the type of property development and place that we would like to create, we really started to organize our thoughts around how to create an open space system, how to cluster development in a way that can preserve areas of the property or organize and plant areas of the property to create a larger open space system that responds to the way everyone enjoys this land, enjoys the island, and thinks about pedestrian ways through this site, both to the beach and to larger connections off the property. So this is an illustration of the vision that we have alongside East West to develop a property that would cluster the vertical development in a way that would allow us to create this open space system that comes to the oceanfront, has an opportunity for a club facility, which would include some lower structures along that frontage, and would really have a limit to how much development limiting development from what is already allowed in a way that would create a place. We're interested in properties and projects that create places where people live and enjoy them and preserve those reasons why we all look to come there in the first place. As part of our analysis, we looked also at the as of right, and we often look at that day one alongside our partners and look at the potential for the property beyond what is allowed. And looking at what is allowed is in fact a large number of buildings limited to 7 units. So in thinking about how to create larger open space, we talked with the client and worked with the client with regard to really clustering that residential development in a building footprint assembly that would really limit the impact of the buildings on the ocean frontage, but also preserve the opportunity for other landscape to really invoke the native landscape and use topography, use stormwater, use plantings in a way that would really help to bring in and identify this property and this development visually to anyone as a guest or a resident as part of Kiowa Island, as part of the aesthetic that you've worked so hard to develop but also preserve. So that was a comparison of how the two might look next to one another, and really just wanted to kind of walk through this opportunity, and in doing so, requesting the amendment to allow the 20 units in a building to allow this type of site organization to be constructed. I think also Will Little from East West Partners can walk through some of the other elements of the plan as far as coverage and so forth that will help illustrate how the amendment would be in place with regard to development here.
If you aren't going to stress it, I will stress it because I've seen these, that for anybody sitting out in the audience, these are schematics which show a vision of what could be done. The fact, while you'll see later in the documents that there is more detail about where things can go and so on, no one should expect that exactly what is here is what will ultimately be built. It will be similar, right. It will be under those constraints, but if anybody comes back later and says, well, but there was a little building that had these little, that isn't the detail we're going to here.
That's right. It's an illustration and it's a concept as part of a master plan exercise to consider the plan and the potential, but also to explore ideas.
Right. But this attachment, for example, will never appear in the development agreement and is not a part of the development agreement. I just want to make that clear to people.
As long as you're clarifying, could you just clarify, does Duneside Road open up into Southern Pines Lane? It's impossible to tell from sitting here.
Yeah, as
Yes.
part of the agreement that was reached, yes. So the drawing of the road here reflects the agreement that was reached a year ago between KICA and the developer and the planning commission.
Yeah, and to further elaborate on that point, I think the decision before council today is really paramount to being able to continue site progress. So as you mentioned, the site illustrations you see before you are conceptual in nature and will develop over time, but this decision is kind of critical to that. I would just like to thank the council on behalf of East West Partners. We have spent a lot of hours and energy and conversations discussing this concept with you all, hearing your feedback, hearing your concerns, and hopefully we've addressed those. I think kind of in summary, what our request is for one exception to the existing development agreement, which is to have more than 20 units in a building. And in consideration for that request, we are willing to limit the total number of buildings on the site to 6 buildings, as we've discussed. We are willing to reduce the density, allowable density under the development agreement, which is right now 12 units per acre, to approximately 6 units per acre. So it would be a total of 84 units, 4 of which would be club cottages, and then 80 residential units. And then further, to limit the building coverage on the site to 25% or less. We think these are all considerations that enhance the site plan and help us execute the vision that you see here.
You said 25, is that, I didn't hear it correctly.
Yes, the building
Okay.
coverage would be 25% or less.
Now, there's one other piece of this. Do we have all of the attachments that can be put up? Because the one you didn't mention, which I think is, well, the one that's pretty important is the one which shows the setbacks from the ocean for building height.
Yes, and that was the last comment I was going to address. Is it?
Sorry, I got it.
Yeah, no, that's totally okay.
I just didn't hear you getting to it.
Is also a reduction of height along the beachfront. So this is the exhibit that illustrates the height reduction along the beachfront. In this exhibit, we're not only preserving the height directly along the beachfront, but also the view corridor in front of the Timbers property and out from Duneside, and then further a reduction of height at the beach club facility in the center of the site to really try to preserve the open space that Hart Howerton has so eloquently designed thus far.
And outside of the restriction zones, the height is 65 feet, is that correct?
That is correct.
And that's by agreement that's already in place?
That's correct. There are no requested change to that portion of the agreement.
And the 60, I know the answer to this, I'm just trying to get it out on the record. So the number of dwelling units that would be allowed on this is ultimately 72. 68 plus 4.
No,
I'm sorry.
84.
I got the old. So it's 84. Which
84
is
total
80,
units.
80, which would be in multifamily buildings.
That's correct.
The 20 or lower, and 4 that we are referring to as club cottages, that would be dwelling units, but are different in terms of their siting on the property and their use. Correct.
Yes, that's correct. And that just for everyone's benefit, I think I've got a pointer here. If you can see the pool in the middle of the site, the club cottages are just above and to the left of the pool, those 2 small buildings. Oh, do I?
Yes, it's right on the top. No, it's on the top of the buttons.
Oh, yeah. So these 2 smaller buildings are the contemplated to be the club cottages. Thank you.
May I ask a question on the, and Mark, this is probably for you, can you put that map back up for just a moment?
Absolutely.
On the north side of Southern Pines / Duneside, that's really what would be referred to as parcel 13B, if we're going to be consistent with what we've said. And that's where, if I do the math correctly, that, I know that's not under discussion today, but that would have 129 dwelling units authorized. Is that correct?
That's correct, maximum, right.
Okay. And would that have access via Southern Pines Duneside, or would that have access only through Beachwalker?
Well, portions of this area to the north, only portions of it can have access to Southern Pines per the agreement with Kika.
That agreement is 120 units, am I remembering that correct?
120 units total.
And you've got 21 and 84
so let's
here.
assume, right, plus the 21 timbers.
Yeah, 21 plus 84.
No,
You got 21 timbers.
Yeah, 21 timbers. Now, go to 120, only 120 additional.
Additional, I got
Now,
you.
the 84 would be part of the 120.
I got you.
So the balance, Siri, what is the balance? The balance, right, the balance is the maximum allowable in that parcel to the north that could be accessed off of
36 units.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. what I'm gonna do, because I wanna make sure.
No, go ahead.
If I could comment about one additional restriction, is in the up to 6 buildings that are allowed for the 80 units, there is a layered stipulation that there can only be 2 buildings of those 6 that can go up to 20. There can only be an additional 2 that can go up to 12, and then the remaining 2 can only go up to 8. So it's not as if suddenly all those 6 buildings can have 20 units in them. So there's a hierarchy established for that.
And is the intent on these buildings to be investment properties? Is it similar to timber from an ownership perspective?
So our plan right now is whole ownership residences. So they would be sold as condominium residences.
Okay.
I want to make sure everybody has a chance here to ask any questions, make sure they're comfortable, so I'm going to actually go down the line. Claus, do you have any questions, comments, points that you want to make?
I don't think so.
Chris?
I've asked my questions. Thank you.
Dan?
I would make one comment. I think what they're proposing is a better use of critical land than what would be allowed under the existing agreement, and therefore we're being asked to make an adjustment that, in my opinion, provides for a better, more Kiowa-like development than would have been allowed under the existing agreement. So
And I
Marion?
agree with Dan. Dan's point is really important. I agree.
Yeah, and I, again, just for the record, do want to point out a couple of things here that I think as people later evaluate this, or as it gets written in the minutes, or I know Island Connections follows this, and that they understand what we're doing here. At the end of the day, this plat is one which in our development agreement and along the length of the island, has as right some of our highest density per acre and some of the highest heights allowed. That was agreed to in 1996. It's a right which the developer has, and there's nothing we're doing here today that's modifying that. And I think, people need to recall, I expect that residents don't know the history of our plats, but the history of this is one in which at one time it was zoned for a 3rd hotel on the island. There were concerns about a 3rd hotel on the island, and whether I didn't live on the island at the time, but through negotiations, it was agreed by the developers to give up the 3rd hotel. But in return for that, the kinds of negotiation that occurred resulted in things such as the addition of Captain Sam's as a developable property, and also the agreement that this plat would have a higher density than we might see elsewhere in the height requirements. So I know that when residents look at this and they will go, wow, 65 feet, that's a big building, that's a lot of density. That's not something that hand has been dealt to us long ago. I think in my conversations individually with the council members, and certainly I think we have communicated strongly to East West and to the Kiowa partners, I think the most sensitive thing to us all along in reviewing this has been the beach and the impact of this development on the beach, the profile, what it would look like, how imposing it would or would not be. And I would note that here, this is an area where the 40-year setback line sets most closely to the ocean, where you do have the ability to develop pretty close up. So I think what has been important to know is that by the existing plan, without us negotiating any change, they could build 65-foot buildings along the entire beachfront. Whether they would or wouldn't, they can build, I think we calculate 5 or 6 buildings and just cover the entire beach. And I would guess economically in the market, that'd be pretty attractive. So what has been, I think, important to the town council members is to try to do something here that would allow as much of the beach, of the actual beach, to be not undeveloped, but for that in development to be pushed back, to be less imposing from the beach. There are trade-offs, and I think the trade-off is what we will see is potentially two pretty large buildings, not higher than they could be, but a lot bigger. And I think I've gotten myself comfortable that in the bigger scheme of things, that's a trade-off that is probably better to make. But I hope that as you develop this property, you, and I think from the conversations I've had, that you recognize that the residents, the property owners here, the beach is pretty special, that you pay particular attention to the look and feel of what you finally do there. I know we're not tying you to this specifically, but a big part of, I think, if this is approved, a big part of the concession to allowing the 2 20-unit buildings is that the outcome of that will be more open space than you could have otherwise done. And it will be a less imposing view from the beach than you otherwise could have done. So I don't know what the vote's going to be, but if it is to provide that latitude, I would hope that you recognize that that is just of critical concern, and we would hope that the eventual development reflects that. I hope that's fairly represents the view.
Yes.
Because this is a adjustment to the development agreement, it did not and does not require a public hearing, 2 readings, or a planning commission action. So with that, I will ask for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
A second. Is there any further discussion?
No.
Questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, the motion is approved.
Thank you very much, members of council.
Second item, I think the rest of this will now go much faster, is to consider approval of ordinance 2019-5, an ordinance to amend the Town of Key Island Municipal Code of Ordinances, Article 7, Public Safety, by adding Chapter 3, Section 7301, Drones and Model Aircraft. Mary Ann?
Yes, drones and model aircraft are part of our technology issues today. Their major concern is with privacy and concerns for public safety. They have the ability to carry wireless cameras that record data and/or transmit live streams of data. Without regulating the takeoff and landing of drones and model aircraft within the jurisdiction of the Town of Kiowa, they could be used to invade the privacy of town residents and guests who are enjoying the use of their property, beach, and other public places. This came up as a result of some complaints we had from residents about invasion of privacy.
I think everybody has a copy and said plenty of time to review the ordinance, and as you said, this was emanated from and is being recommended by the Public Safety
Yes.
Committee. Stephanie, do you have anything else to add? Otherwise, I'll
No,
ask for
nothing.
a motion.
Okay.
All right, do I have a motion to approve?
I so move.
Do I have a second? And again, since this is an ordinance, this requires 2 readings, so we have a motion and a second to approve on first reading. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that's approved. Next item is to consider and approve the CARTA Charleston Area Regional Transport Authority proposed 2020 fiscal year budget. This is something, I guess this group has not had to do this before, but this is something that comes to town council every year. The town of Kiowa Island is a part of and participates on the CARTA board. I am a member of CARTA, but Stephanie Tillerson, our town administrator, is my permanent representative on the CARTA board. As a member municipality, they require us to review and approve their budget. Every year they've had one of their managers come to our meeting and actually present it. And I would Charlie is sitting here, he can tell us how exciting those presentations have been. So this year we told Carta they could save the trip. They didn't need to bring a bus out here, and that we could handle it without them. And so with that, I would first of all ask for a motion to approve.
So moved.
I have a second.
Second.
Does anybody have any questions about the budget? And I think the major thing you will see in there is you'll see a big drop in revenues and a big drop in costs. And the primary part of that is Carta has been involved in a very big capital spending project, and a big part of this was developing this intermodal system, which is up at the old Amtrak station. And that funding, that project is essentially done. The funding has dropped out and the expenses have dropped out. And so if you saw this big 10 million drop, that's what it was. Did I ask for a vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Got it. Okay, it's approved. All right, discussion of Beachwalker Drive speed tables request from Inlet Cove HOA. Stephanie?
Yeah, the mayor had talked about in his mayor's comments with regards to Inlet Cove and the improvements that the Beachwalker County Park did to the park, and then of course the town with our right turn lane. The HOA board has approached us probably, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, and they asked if the town would consider doing a study to put in speed tables. So I have a quote from Kimberly Horn, but prior to doing that, what the mayor asked, and through Brian, who's our public works manager, with the assistance of Kika, we actually were able to get speed counts on Beachwalker Drive, because of course the concern that we heard from the board members there is that there's a lot of speeding. Once we got the data, and I did take a look at the data, there's not very much speeding. It's all within kind of the limits of what you can drive there. There is kind of some peak times where a car would get up to 50 or 55 miles per hour, but I did not see, and probably we did 2 different locations, one closer to the walkway and one closer to Beachwalker Park. And at both locations, there wasn't a recorded amount of speeding. There just wasn't. But with that said, I know that the members of Inlet Cove still would like for us to consider having a study done to look at installing speed tables or a speed table. That cost provided by Kimberly Horn was about $5,000. That cost can come down a little bit if they use our data, but I'm pretty sure they'll probably want to go out and do their own research and their own data. And so what I'm asking you all really is if you have any objection, we can talk, you know, I can provide you the reports that we received from Kika showing the speed limits, but, you know, any concern or consideration to do a study, but again, based on the data that's been provided to us in terms of the speeding on Beachwalker Drive, it just doesn't appear to have a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think the evaluation, looking at the data, and this is material that a machine that Kika has that they use on island that is really very good, and it really allows you to get a profile of what's happening. And I think what we saw from it is there really isn't. I mean, I know you have the illusion of cars going fast, but it's not there. So I think we just do not see the value in spending $4,000 or $5,000 to do the study.
No.
Because we don't think that it will be useful. We would clearly sit down with the Inlet Cove residents and make sure they understand that it's not an arbitrary decision, that we've got data, but I can't see spending the money to do something more. Klaus, I cut you, started to say something.
What the study could show that we don't already know. I mean, wouldn't we run into the same objections where that we haven't picked a representative time or whatever it may be? I mean,
And I think we picked pretty representative times.
It also would be an issue, I think, that I don't know what a speed table would cost, but we'd be spending $5,000 to. I'm sorry. It would seem odd that we'd want to spend $5,000 to study something that might cost $5,000 to build. I don't know what a speed bump costs, but that seems like a lot of money, especially if we have this data already that doesn't indicate we have a problem in the first place.
I would think if they feel this strongly about it, they should provide us with speed data that they've had recorded.
I mean, I was, if we hadn't had this capability, I mean, I think we, for 5,000, we probably would have recommended to go out and do it, but I'm comfortable that the Kika data that we have is really accurate.
Okay, thank you, that's it.
All right, next item, last item is a discussion of beach franchise agreements. And this, I want to make the council aware of an issue that has arisen. Some concerns from both entities who have franchise agreements with the town for the supply of chairs and umbrella setups to people on the beach, and a action which I've talked to the town attorney about taking if there's agreement or if there are other ideas from the town. As you all know, that any entity that wants to provide services or sell goods and services on the beach is required to have a franchise agreement with the town. Currently, 2 entities have franchise agreements. One is Kiawah Island Resort that has an agreement for a expanse of their beach in front of the Sandcastle where they can provide chairs, setups. Did I say Sandcastle? I'm sorry. The Sanctuary.
Liz thinking she's getting more business.
Yeah. The Sanctuary. And then there is a concession to Island Beach Services, which essentially, in shorthand, covers the rest of the beach, although not exactly. There are some cutouts, but essentially covers the rest of the beach. Both of those, they have the exclusive right to provide those services. And in the case of the resort pays us a moderate sum for that franchise agreement. And in the case of Island Beach Services, the town has a contract that we participate in the revenue. We have one or more, if you've probably noticed in this island, there are more and more businesses who are becoming more and more active in providing various kinds of services and goods and services to rental properties. There are probably more bike companies on this island than I've seen 5 years ago. We also now have some situations where one or more rental managers are now providing beach setups, chairs, umbrellas, to their renters. They're doing it through an operation where they essentially credit them amount of money, and then with that they can turn around and rent the equipment. The equipment is not being generally is not being put on the beach. It is being provided to the driveway. It is, however, having an economic impact, I believe, on both of our franchisees in terms of a negative business impact on them. And both of them have asked the town to, and with our attorney, to take a look and make sure that in no way are these activities violating our ordinance or infringing upon our franchise agreements. I believe with the work that we have that for the most part they are not. They are, so long as they are delivering the agreement, the products not to the beach but to the property, then they are not in violation of our franchise ordinance. And we have no, even though they're costing us revenue too, we do not appear to have any latitude to impact that. However, it is also reported that on occasions when they are delivering things to the beach, it may be situations where the rental person says, oh, can you take this out to the beach for us? And they do it. We have some issues because one of the companies purchased the same looking equipment as Island Beach Services, and now people are confused and walking away with Butch's stuff. So we've been asked by both entities to look at this closely and understand and ensure that we're protecting both our rights and their rights. The conversation that I've had with our town attorney is that we would like to recommend that we ask Dwayne to write a letter to the businesses that are at play here, and that we simply inform them and make sure that they fully understand that if they are doing any business on the beach, they must have a business license, a franchise agreement. That they understand that if in fact they do deliver any of their equipment to the beach, retrieve it for the beach, or otherwise operate on the beach, that would be deemed to be a violation of our franchise agreement, and that we would intend to vigorously enforce the rights of both the town and of our franchisees. I think we would be wanting to do this as a educational communication, to just be sure that there is no misunderstanding and that they recognize that we strongly want to reinforce the franchise agreements that we have. I'm wanting to make the council aware of that, and also have some sense of whether you're comfortable with us taking that approach, or if there are any thoughts or ideas to the contrary on how we approach this issue.
Well, let me ask a couple of questions, and I think it's mostly for Stephanie, because I don't know the answer. When we provide a business license to a property manager, does that business license give them the right to do any number of things, or is it limited to simply property management? I mean, with that license, can they then become a bicycle supplier? Can they also become a beach equipment supplier?
Yes, they could. They don't have to get
Independent
licenses for the various different businesses they operate.
Can we put restrictions on a license that says this license prohibits you from distributing beach equipment to your renters?
I'm not aware of doing any type of restriction like that.
I know, but can we put such a restriction on, is my question.
I would have to consult with an attorney to see from a business license standpoint if we can do that.
You're shaking your head no, why? I couldn't hear you, why? To protect the beach franchise that the town has committed to.
But they, when they apply for license, they say they do not supply on the beach. They only supply to their home.
I understand, but my question is, do we have the legal ability to say that license has a restriction? You have a license to be a property manager. That doesn't put you automatically into the bicycle rental business or the beach supply business. And can we actually prohibit that if we view this as a threat to franchisees that we've authorized?
I'm not sure if we can prohibit that. What we would do is, in regards to sending a letter in terms of telling them that they operate on the beach, but to basically go to a business and say you cannot operate that particular business on the island, I'm not sure we can do. But if I understand what your question is at, if on the license we can prohibit them from operating on the beach.
No, I'm asking specifically, can we put a restriction that says you cannot supply equipment that conflicts with an existing franchise agreement the town has?
That's a question for the attorney. And we'll have to look into that. I don't know if we have that answer for you right now.
Yeah, I'll do a little further research into that, and thank you to the mayor and for Stephanie for bringing me up to speed. I have reviewed both franchise agreements. We certainly have a right to make sure that the franchise agreements that we do have in place are respected and that the franchisees' rights are respected as well. We are on legally solid ground to advise in an educational manner any businesses that are interfering with theirs, what their rights are, and that franchise agreements are how we operate. But we want to be very careful that we're not playing favorites or endorsing some businesses over others if they're doing what's otherwise a legally permissible business. especially if we do that after the fact. If you tell someone when they get an agreement that these are the specific things that you can do on the front end, that's typically when you would set the parameters of what their business can do. But if it's otherwise a legal business, for instance, allowing residents to rent property or rent equipment that otherwise might be available on the beach, to prohibit that after the fact would be legally problematic.
Well, we wouldn't need to do it after the fact. The license is renewed every year. So, I mean, you could certainly do it at time of license renewal.
And that's something we can look into for the renewal going forward.
Sure.
I do think we have some concerns or some potential legal challenges on the way that's done, but I do agree with the mayor that in the interim, allowing these other businesses to know we have franchise agreements with entities that are specifically allowed to operate on the beach, and to the extent that your equipment begins to get into that area, we have the right to enforce that. And I think we can look at these options as those come up, but I can look into that question that you have when it comes for time for renewal for the other businesses that are not part of that franchise.
And do we have a sense for the financial impact of this? Not so much to the franchisee, but to the town?
Approximately 50,000 or so, as I know Craig and I, the mayor and I discussed earlier on. That was a rough estimate, and I'm sure that those numbers, we can look at that once we have some actual data.
Maybe in citizens' comments.
Correct.
One of our citizens can educate us on what that impact might be.
But we'll definitely follow up with that educational letter, and I will let council know what kind of response we've received.
All right.
Great, thank you.
Again, I wanted to more than anything make the council aware of this issue and concern. All right. All right. With that, town administrators report.
I have none.
Council members, I'll start with Marianne.
No report.
Dan.
I'm good.
Chris.
Nothing.
Klaus.
Nothing.
All right. Then I will now open up to citizens' comments.
Wendy Kulik, 38 Marsh Edge Lane. I just have a quick question. I know that short-term rental changes, restrictions, whatever, are being looked at, and I was wondering whether there would be an opportunity provided before any recommendations are made to council to consider, if property owners would have an opportunity to provide input and comments, and when you talk to the various rental agencies, which I'm sure you've done, did they have any input into draft wording?
I'm glad you raised that. And the answer is I anticipate that we will bring for first reading, a recommendation for a revised short-term rental ordinance to the September meeting. In the past couple weeks, the team that has been working on this have met with some of the major rental managers. They've met with the resort, they've met with Pam Harrington, they've met with Acres Ellis. I think they have in the next week or so a meeting set with several of the smaller tier, which is intended to overview what we're looking at doing, and get their input, which did not get into things like wording. It was up at conceptual levels, and they're being heard and considered. What I anticipate our plan between now and September is not yet fully laid out. But I think we're at a point where what I will probably do is issue a communication. Well, before that, we are planning to take another one-on-one set of conversations with the council members to make sure that individually each of them fully understands what we're out talking about. And then we will probably do some sort of a communication to our residents and property owners that outlines in some detail the nature of the ordinance and what changes, and while it will look different, I will tell you 90% of what is in this ordinance currently exists today. It may be written differently, it may be written in a more enforceable sense, but we haven't wholesale changed stuff.
I was just thinking, Craig, from the perspective of we have so many people on this island who, whether it's through VRBO or whatever, rent their places individually.
So we will get that communication to them, and at some point, I will, between them, take a reading and get some recommendations from those sitting on both sides of me on how we want to get that input and whether it's enough to communicate to them and just ask for communication back, whether I might want to hold a little town hall meeting that allows people that are interested to come in and ask questions. I don't know the answer to that yet, but I've not closed the door on either, and I want to have some conversations with people.
The other thought I had, given that I don't remember the last time a town council meeting went until 5 o'clock, is that when there are and there were a lot of substantive important items that were discussed today, not something, you could just run through quickly. Have you ever given any consideration when there are meetings like this with such a packed agenda to starting the meeting earlier? And if not, I just throw that out as a thought.
Okay. Any other citizens' comments? Thank you.
I thought Liz might, Butch Neal, Island Beach Service. I thought Liz might say a comment, but if not, I'll go ahead. And I just want to thank you, and I'm grateful that you are aware of the situation on the beach. And just thought if you had any questions that I might could answer, I'd be glad to.
Is it impacting your business?
Absolutely. Probably around 30,000 to this point.
Is that a calendar year? Is that within this calendar year, or is this over a
within
period
this
of time?
We start in March on the beach, so it's within this calendar year, yes.
And is this a new phenomenon?
Yes.
So this has not been done until this year?
That's right.
But how much, since it seems pretty clear that we don't really have much of a legal ability to curtail the delivery of beach equipment to the renter, how much relief from your revenue loss do you expect if we warn off the delivery to the beach? Because it sounds like that's all we can really do.
After thinking about this, after speaking with Stephanie and thinking about this, Trevor and I think that with their equipment is not of the quality we use. They try to, it looks like our quality of equipment, but it's not. So we think that possibly after this year, they may decline to do that again, or they may only do it as much as their equipment lasts. So again, we think that will decrease, and we think that probably our revenue, maybe even there won't be as big a percentage of our revenue in the future, rest of this year.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other citizens' comments?
Thank you.
All right. We do have an executive session scheduled. I think everybody knows we try to do those, but relatively rarely. But this is pursuant to Section 30-4-70A5 of the South Carolina Code to discuss matters relating to an economic development project adjacent to the Municipal Center on Johns Island. I'm going to anticipate the questions I'm always asked. I do not expect that we will make any decisions. I do not expect that we will make any votes. And I do expect that we will take about 30 minutes. Do I have a motion to
Adjourn
to go into executive session?
Yes.
Second. All in favor? All right.
Thank you.
Take us off the record.
I will.
So I should bring up the issue of cocktails.